Good afternoon. This meeting is called to order on August 24th, Tuesday at 1 p.m. We'll begin with the invocation, and it is Daniel Aguilar with the Centro Apostolic Tabernacle.
Good afternoon. Would you please join me in bowing our hearts in prayer? Almighty God, we come before you to thank you for all that you have provided for each and every one of us. We thank you for the life you give us, for permitting us to live in the greatest country on earth, and for everyone and everything that makes the Imperial Valley a great place to live. We also come before you, acknowledging that you move in the affairs of man, to humbly ask that you would endow this board of directors with wisdom from on high, that you would give them the insight, integrity, and fortitude to do what is proper and pleasing unto you. We also ask that all who would approach this board do so in a spirit of respect and deference to the great responsibilities that this board is tasked with. In your precious name, amen. Now, if you would join me, placing your hand over your heart, gazing towards the symbol of our nation, we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel, or Pastor Daniel. Are there any report actions taken in closed session?
Yes, sir, but I need to pull out my paperwork. Can we go forward with the comments and I'll have it ready?
Okay. We'll do comments from the board.
No, that's not. No, we have approval of agenda.
This is all, I know you guys changed it. Where is comments? Oh, there we are.
Well, no.
Okay. The approval of agenda?
So move. Did you have?
Yes, I believe this fits under the order of the agenda items. I'd like 7 on consent to be pushed on to action.
Okay. Which ones, Mr. Abadi?
Number
7.
7? Okay.
Okay. Any other ones?
Now's the time to take care of the consent issues. I'd like to remove 3A.
Okay.
Push it to the
Action.
Your mic's on, Lloyd.
That it?
Director Hanks, I think your brother's saying your mic's not on.
Sorry about that. I requested that item 3A be moved to the end of the action.
If you want to, before consent, Director Hanks, I think I can resolve your concern about 3A. There's a typographical error or a miscommunication in the securities, the SCI memo with regard to that claim. It's not a 1-cent claim. It's a claim that's above the jurisdictional limit that allows someone to get into Superior Court. I don't know why they said that. It's not correct. It's an unspecified amount above $10,000.
Mr. Garber, you're talking about closed session items.
No, I'm talking about a consent item.
Excuse me, that
3A.
closed. So we're not even there yet. So.
Well, yeah, I just thought I could make it
Well,
easier.
why don't you wait until we get to that point?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I moved for approval of the agenda.
Second.
First and a second. Please vote. Do we go into order of agenda items? Or was that both?
That was both.
That was both?
That was
Director
both.
Sanchez, what that means is you can move
Well,
one item in front
yeah.
of another item if we need to be, or take items out of the consent agenda.
We'll
So,
move on to presentation, service awards.
SCI.
Okay, Mr. President, members of the board, members of the public, it's my pleasure to present this first service award, the certificate of recognition and service pin replica of the district emblem presented to Mark Gappinger for 20 years of loyal and faithful service to the Imperial Irrigation District.
For 20 years of service, John Alumeti, lineman journeyman in the Energy Department. For 25 years of service, Dennis Singh, hydrographic technician in the Water Department. For 30 years of service, Arthur Guillen Sanjero in the Water Department. For 35 years of service, Ernest Pacheco, construction worker water leader in the Water Department. Is there anyone else here to receive a service award and I didn't call your name? Okay, that ends our service awards.
This is a public meeting, and at this time, it's time for public comment. You may address the board on items that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Imperial Irrigation District, but not an item on the agenda. Those who wish to address the board, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Mr. President, if we might, we're just going to go back one and take anything reported out of closed session.
Yes,
Then we'll
okay.
do public comment. Jeff?
Yes, in closed session, the board took action to, there were 3 board members present, and all 3 board members took action to enter into a settlement and additional leases with Magma Land Company 1. The various documents that will be executed, and when they are executed, will be made available to the public or as follows: mutual release and settlement agreement, quitclaim deed, third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Region 1, memorandum of third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Region 1, third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Obsidian Butte, memorandum of third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Obsidian Butte, third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Black Rock North, memorandum of third amended and restated geothermal lease and agreement, Black Rock North, Region 1 easement agreement, and memorandum of Region 1 easement agreement. The general manager was given authority to execute those documents, and they should be executed by both parties within the next 7 days.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Move on to comments from the public. Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. My name is Efrain Silva. I'm the Dean of Economic and Workforce Development for Imperial Valley College. I'm here, I understand that the absence of IVC at the last discussion you had dealing with the local entity was recognized. And I want to say that I may have misinterpreted what was relayed to me from your staff as far as the necessity for us to be here, so I apologize for that. We were not able to get on the agenda for today. We'll do so if we need to at a future meeting, but I wanted to briefly give you an update on the local entity funding that was received by IBC. And as you may recall, the basic purpose of that funding is to provide small businesses with equipment loan to be able to flourish in our community. The process took much longer than we anticipated because of setting up the basic commission that reviewed these loans, the basic criteria for both the loan awards and the conversion of those loans to grants. We have done all that, and just before the deadline passed, we did notify your local entity representative that we had concluded with the award, and we had requested that the funding be released to us to be able to, in fact, issue back those awards. The loan committee that reviewed these loans were made up of local representatives from the banking industry and from cities. They did a very thorough review of the applications. They looked at the viability of the business. They looked at the likelihood of repayment. They looked at the likelihood of converting those loans to grants. They made some recommendations. We are awarding the maximum allowed under the IID grant, and we're combining those fundings with funding that we have from the federal government through HUD to issue an overall award to these 12 businesses of $35,000 each. 25 will come from the local entity, from the IID, and 10 will be leveraged from federal funding. So we're at that point where we are requesting that the remaining of the funds be released to IVC so we can, in fact, issue those awards. And the way the process works is the grantees, the awardees, will be given a window of 6 months to come up with some objectives. And in fact, if they're able to meet or surpass those objectives, the loan will be converted to a grant, so it's basically forgivable. Among the items that they can accomplish, we're looking at job creation, job retention, educating the workforce, providing benefits to their workforce, and there's other criteria that would allow us to make that conversion. So that's where we are. I'm not sure if the releasing of those funds will require you to take a formal action. I'm not really sure what the status as far as IVC is concerned, but we can either come back at a future meeting and request that formally, or if it's a matter of IID direction from the board direction, whatever needs to be done, but we are ready to proceed.
Thank you. Brian, could
Yes.
you prepare that?
Yes, I will.
For the next step, please. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? All right, we'll move on to. Go ahead, Oscar. State your name and address for the record, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, board members, are those mics functional? Work, those right there? Do they work?
They should.
No, because I think the last time Mr. Menville brought it to my attention that I have to speak, but it's really difficult for me to stand for a long time, for more than 10 minutes. And
Well, you only have 5 minutes, Oscar.
no, I realize that, but even when I speak on other issues, it's very difficult. I think you should make those accessible.
Yes, sir.
And,
Go ahead.
Okay? Thank you. Can I speak out of that?
Go
Can I-
ahead. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, because, under the federal handicap section 504A to C, you guys have to make special accommodations for handicap, and I'm a handicap officially. So, thank you. I want to talk about, very briefly, in 5 minutes, let me speak about the first one. It's about ECA. On the agenda today, there is an item called the Emergency Charge Adjustment ECA. Said
Oscar,
item-
we can't talk about the ECA until the item of the ECA,
Oh, okay.
not
well,
on the agenda.
Let me talk about the other three then.
Okay.
First of all, the bourgeoisie attorneys from over the hill, Mr. Osai, I really would like to find out how much money they have earned in addition to the consultants they've hired. It's my understanding that since Horton, Knox, and Carter, and I don't know who the other name is, were representing IID, one of the main criticisms by Rudy Maldonado was that they spent too much money, they were earning too much money. But based on my research, affirmatively and assuredly, I think Mr. Osias, in due respect, and his consultants have exceeded what the aforementioned law firm local. And I sure would certainly like to know, since they took over, how much have they earned, number one. Number two, I think it was Mr. Menville. I wasn't here that day when they were, I think, Mr. Menville, you were trying to reinforce or create a policy for people that were disruptive, and you were basically thinking of me. I know, because I said something to Mr. Dan Brady, and I want to apologize because I said SHIT. But in all due respect, I think under the First Amendment and my civil rights, I can say anything I say, and I want to categorically and emphatically state that it may not be to your liking, but that's my style. I've been an activist for 34 years since I was at UCSB, and I was Mecha, UMAS, Third World, and a communist in theory. And because I got married and I was hungry, my wife said, no, you can't go to Cuba. But I'm going to say one thing. I'm still a radical at heart, but I want to reform the system here. Mike Morgan, Orbia Hanks, Tony Ramos, and yours truly, the issue is not about personalities. Who spends more money litigating? I can sue the IID. They won't charge anything because I'm low income. $380 doesn't mean diddly to me because I can sue, and as long as I get somebody that can touch it up, I'll make you guys spend money, and I won't spend 1 cent. Osias will make a lot of money, but so I hope you really, Mr. Menville, for your benefit and IID, even the grand jury advised you guys that you guys had violated the civil rights of people. And certainly when you guys discussed the Brown Act, you violated it again. The issue is not that you discussed specifically the salary of Dr. Brady. The issue is that you didn't discuss the content, the discussion. Sure, you talked about the salary as advised by Mr. what's his name, Mr. Garber, Jeff Garber. But the issue there, and I want to emphatically state, it was the nature of the discussion. Very simply, you violated that. Okay, and the last thing, oh no, I got to talk about ECA when it comes, right?
Thank you, Oscar.
That's it.
Any other public comments? All right, we'll move on to comments from the board. We'll start with Director Mendoza.
No comment.
Director Abadi.
I said, Dr. Brady, at the end of September, Director Mendoza and I have a steering committee. I was wondering if it's possible to have a reliability compliant update for the public, maybe in October, knowing that the audit in December is coming close, so they're aware of what we're going up against. And also, when will we be starting the budget process?
Well, we have, well, for the board, I think that's, Greg, that's October, when the board will see it. We've been working on, in fact, it's largely done, but we'll be bringing it to the board for your first review in October.
Thank you.
Director Menville.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Garber, I wanted to ask you on Sunday's IV press article dealing with the QSA. I know they had in there the Morgan Holtz seeks $15 million in attorney's fees, and $7.59 million was in court fees, and $7.63 million was in non-lawyer professionals. And I said they had filed that, I think it was on April 20th, and then there was a 3 times in there. So exactly what are they looking for? They filed $15 million and trying to get fees back, and then it's times 3, or how's that work?
They filed a motion for attorney's fees claiming that they were prevailing party in the underlying matter that was determined by Judge Candie. I don't know what they prevailed in, but in any event, that was their claim. It was $15 million in fees, and I'd have to look at the motion to tell you how it breaks down. I do remember that there were no bills. They claim that they don't have bills, nor do they give bills to their client. They asked for their fees to be multiplied by what's called a lodestar of 3. So they wanted a recovery of $45 million based on a law that's called the Private Attorney General Law, which essentially allows someone to recover fees when they perform a function that's good for the public in general. Their motion was never heard because the QSA appeal went forward and the case was stayed. And I don't know what will happen to it. It will depend on what happens to the case.
Okay, thank you. Then another question I have on it wasn't exactly a lawsuit, but on the filings against the bonds, issuance of bonds for the Unit 3 at Dogwood, the $254 million. I know that Mr. Morgan and Mr. Foster filed on that, so what is the status on that for us moving forward on trying to get the bonds? You guys are going to be looking into that.
Well, that is a lawsuit. It was filed against the resolutions and some of the financing contracts, and it's a reverse validation action to challenge the validity of that resolution and those contracts. That bond financing has not moved forward as of this time, and you'd have to discuss with Mr. Broking what his intentions are. I'm not sure. We're litigating that matter now.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Hanks?
No comment.
All right, I have no comment. Mr. Brady?
Nothing at this time.
Legal?
I would like to note for the record that your First Amendment rights here at the district in public comment are not the same as they would be out on the street. This is a limited public forum. To the extent that you make comments that have something to do with the district's business, they would be appropriate. Obviously, there's a lot of latitude, but to the extent that you're disruptive or deemed inappropriate, it's possible that your comment could be squelched and that you could be asked to leave. There is a governance policy that addresses this that is consistent with the law. I think it was, I don't know if it was the last board meeting or the board meeting before that we did put that governance policy in the agenda.
Thank you. We'll move on to consent. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
We got a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second. Please vote. Informational items, governance. Item number 10, legislative update.
Jennifer Goodsell.
Good afternoon, President Sanchez, members of the board. The local government legislative package that I'm going to talk to you about today is a series of bipartisan legislative reforms that are to create greater transparency and accountability in response to the financial scandals at the City of Bell. In light of the recent activity, Public Affairs wanted to briefly update the board and the public as to how this legislative package would affect special districts. When the board memo was created for this agenda item, there were only 2 bills that had been officially introduced. Late last week, 6 additional bills were introduced, bringing the local government legislative package to 8 bills in total. Of those 8, there are only 4 that pertain to special districts, and if enacted, the district would be required to comply with. The first is Assembly Bill 1955. This bill is in your agenda packet. It's a lengthy bill with only one provision that pertains to special districts, and that is the one that amends the Brown Act to require that all contracts of employees who report directly to the governing body, which would be you, would have to be approved in open session, and that the contents of that compensation contract would have to be posted on the website at least 5 days prior to the contract being ratified in open session. Now, that doesn't change the fact that you can have discussions in closed session and negotiations in closed session. It just means that any final action that is to be taken has to be done in open session, and that contract has to be available for the public to review. Moving on to the second bill, Assembly Bill 827. This prevents evergreening clauses, which are automatic renewals in the contracts of unrepresented individuals who report directly to the governing body of a local agency. It prohibits automatic salary increases in these contracts unless it's a cost of living adjustment. And in order to have an automatic salary increase, there has to be a vote of the governing board. The last thing it prevents is it also prohibits the severance payments for these individuals of greater than a 12-month salary. There has to be a performance review prior to increasing any salary beyond a cost of living adjustment if this particular bill is to be enacted. Assembly Bill 2064 is a simple piece of legislation, and all that it requires is that each special district has to post on its website the annual salaries received by each elected official and each designated employee. For purposes of this bill, a designated employee is one that has to file a Form 700. So those salaries would have to be posted on the district's website. The last bill that I'm going to talk to you about is Senate Bill 501. It's a little bit more complex. It requires each officer or designated employee of a special district to file a compensation disclosure form. This form provides compensation information for the preceding year. It defines a designated employee and an officer as any employee or elected official that's required to file a statement of economic interest pursuant to existing law, which is the Form 700. This particular form has not yet been developed, but will be developed by the Secretary of State if the Senate bill is approved. And this particular form will provide for the disclosure of annual salaries or stipends, payments or contributions to the filer's deferred compensation or defined benefits plan, automobile and equipment allowances, supplemental incentive and bonus payments, and additional payments to the filer that are in excess of the standard benefits package that the local agency offers to all other employees. Those are the 4 bills currently before the legislature that could potentially affect the district. These bills were last amended on Friday, August 20th. That's supposed to be the last day to amend bills. However, the governing rule is routinely ignored, so there's a slight possibility that could be amended one more time before session ends. As of right now, the legislature is scheduled to adjourn on August 31st, so these bills are moving quickly, but we will continue to monitor them and report back to the board which ones get enacted and are passed. Are there any questions?
I have a question of Mr. Garber. Mr. Garber?
Yes,
or
sir.
even Mr. DeVoy. In light of this City of Bell and some of the salaries and things that are going on, what is and the employees we have here, is there any way that on our IID website we can put a list of the employees here and the salaries so that the public can see exactly what the salaries are for the IID from the top to the bottom?
We could. We have provided that information to the newspaper on a regular basis. Some of the employees are concerned about that with regard to security issues. The state of the law currently is that there is a case out there that says at least employees making more than $100,000, that information should be disclosed. I think when you're talking about Bell, you're talking about high salaries, not everybody's salary. I don't know that some employees that are further down the rung really need to be disclosed, but there's a lot of things we can do, and we do. I get contacted by the newspaper every 3 or 4 months doing a salary survey.
Well, could you look into the legality of that, and if there's a possibility that we can list employees, not by name, but at least the positions that they hold and the amount of money that's being paid since we're a public agency? Because I get to ask that question all the time. What's going on?
We can do that if that's something that the board wants us to do.
I just
Sure.
like it to be looked into, and then maybe the board could take that into consideration.
Yes, sir.
We can bring that back. We will bring that back.
Okay.
Jennifer, on Senate Bill 501, how different again is that from 700?
It will be a form that has to be filed in addition to the Form 700. And it becomes the responsibility of the local agency to make that form available on the website for the public to review for anyone who wants to see it at any time.
So that'll essentially perform the same function as what you're talking about, Director Manville.
Any other questions?
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. This new format is confusing. Okay, draft number 11, draft compensation policy.
This is an item that Director Hanks placed on the board for information. As the board will recall, the board directed myself to meet with Director Hanks, and I've got Mr. DeVoy from HR and Mr. Campbell as well. We have that meeting scheduled. It got rescheduled. And I think Director Hanks wanted to give us a much better idea of what he had in mind, and this is certainly a much more refined description. I understand it, and we're more than willing to write this into a new policy. I did want to check on some things. We do have a current policy, number 4222, that dates back to either 92 or 95. It shows both dates. That's going to have to be rewritten because that interferes with some of these concepts. We're also probably going to have to address two of our governance policies, B3 and B2, that also may address it. And the biggest concern is making this policy in a way that it's actually effective. In other words, so you're comparing apples and apples. You want to compare some quantitative number to another number to ensure that there's compliance. And I look forward to meeting with Director Hanks and getting this done.
I have a question or comment, Director Hanks. We have base salary compensation exceeding 90% of the general manager's base salary. In 3 years from now, let's say the general manager's salary is up to it's $275 right now, but for some reason it's at $340. The person at the helm can technically raise the other 7 contract employees up to $300. Now, is that something that, or I guess my question is, why is the general manager offering wages above the grade level that current grade level, for example, water manager, I believe it's between 180 and 200. Why would he offer anything more than the current grade level?
Well, you know, and it could work the other direction too, that if a salary was set lower, there'd be some past it. I put this out mainly as because there seemed to be a lot of questions and a lot of comments that were being added that I didn't think was a reflection of what I was looking for. So I put this as a framework from which to start, the meeting with the General Counsel has escalated to 6 staff members being invited to attend.
6?
And I understand that when you set policy, there could be some encroachment into some of the HR issues, and that needs to be decided. But my intent of putting this here was to give a backbone, kind of a framework of what I was thinking, and it would also give you an opportunity to respond or any comments that you want to add or contribute to that discussion in developing a policy. Could be considered or added to it.
Any other I like it. I just I think we should be looking at what we have out there at the grade level first, and then if it's difficult to hire someone, then give the general manager authority to go up to 90% of the general manager's salary or more. Other than that, that's the only feeling I have. I don't know if the other directors have any other feelings about the other.
I think, Mr. My understanding of what Director Hanks is trying to do does not remove the step and grade process. He's putting a maximum. He's not necessarily saying that everybody can make that amount. He's just saying you can't make more than it. Almost all our employees fit within that step and grade level, and maybe we need to provide some more information concerning that.
Well,
this is a limit, not necessarily saying anybody can make that much money.
Right. I think it was to come to the board and get permission. If the grade level ends at 200 and Mr. Brady's salary is 275, technically he can offer a water manager 240, 250, which is above 200 of the grade level, and it's below the 90%. I'm asking for the permission to come past the grade level up to 250, not just 90% or higher.
I'm not sure I understand, but I think you want a little more control, but I'm not sure. I don't know where the grade levels end.
Yeah, the comment I made to Mr. Garber, I kind of referred to this as a salary apex policy, and it doesn't determine anyone's salary, and it doesn't necessarily limit. If it exceeds the general manager's salary, basically there should be a justification for it and ratification by the board. That's what I'm asking for.
Yes, Director Hanks, on this meeting on August the 31st, is there any way you could have a second director there? I'd like to attend this meeting if that's possible.
Makes,
Okay?
yeah,
Okay.
just don't make 3.
Are there any other comments by the board? Is the board in consensus with the item number 1 as far as the exceeding 90%?
Well, I would like, from my standpoint, when you're talking about grade level, that's why I'd like to go to this meeting to listen to what's going on, have some input, but I kind of agree with you along the lines of the grade level, and I think we need to take a look at this. And I know the way Director Hanks has it, base is at 275 for Dr. Brady, and nobody can exceed that, 90% of that. But I would just like to give this some thought, and I'm sure the rest of the board would, and we put some more thought into this and bring it back and have further discussion on it and see what we can end up with.
Yeah, but keep in mind, the policy that I recommend here does not limit the salary to the 275. It does require board approval if it goes beyond that.
Right, comes before the board.
Right.
Yeah.
And the 2,080, that's an normal annual work year. Is that what that's where that number's from? The 2,080? That's a normal work year based on the
I'm
980.
sorry, I was conferring with
Yeah,
Mr.
that's-
Garber. I didn't get
Is that what that is?
the question.
Probably.
In general, yeah. In general, that's a full-time schedule. However, anybody at that level is exempt from those types of rules that govern overtime and things like that. So go ahead.
No, I'm fine with 1 through 5.
When you say they're exempt, that means we can require more too, huh?
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's double it.
All right. We'll see if we can do something else or bring it back as is and vote on it. Moving on to item number 12, quantification settlement agreement.
Yeah, so this is 2 parts. The first part will be Mr. Broken going over an update of the water transfer cash flow and other projections. And then we'll have Mr. Asias.
The last update I gave on the water transfer was in September of 2009, I believe. And since then, Dr. Brady has negotiated an agreement with the San Diego County Water Authority to substantially increase the cash flow that we're going to be getting from the transfer. It's almost an additional $400 million. And I'll talk about those components in a little more detail as I go through the slides. I'll also compare the 2004 projection with the 2009 projection that we did in September of 2009. That was for the period through 2047. And then with the new settlement agreement with the Water Authority, we'll also have a comparison among those 3. I'll also talk about the financial forecast, the water transfer capital projects. There's a whole bunch of opportunities, challenges, and risk associated with the transfer, and I'll talk a little about the financing plan also, which is kind of in a state of flux. An update on the price settlement. At the end of last year, we settled with the Water Authority. As part of that settlement, they made us a payment on December 31st of $6 million, which covered the dispute that we were about to litigate for years 2008 and 2009. We set the transfer price for the next 5 years. I think this year it's $405 an acre foot. It goes to $624 in 2015. Beginning in 2016, it's escalated through 2034. And then in 2035, it reverts back to the original price formula. And in addition to, at least in the near term, fixing the prices that we're going to be receiving from the Water Authority for the amount of water we transfer, on October 1st, providing the transfer agreement has not been terminated, or we will be receiving $50 million from the Water Authority for the water transfer capital projects. There are some clawback provisions on that. But within the first 16 or 17 months, I think we were able to use $25 million of that money and not have to pay it back. Last week I mentioned about the iBank guarantee status.
Greg, Director
Yes.
Body has a quick question.
Dr. Brokington, these new projections that you're going off of, and that cancels the need for any $1 per acre foot increase between 20 and 26?
No, we still have that in the forecast for each rate class for those, I think it's 6 years, 2021 through 2026.
Even with the extra, after been recalculated, do you have a pro forma that you did to take a look at?
Pardon me?
Did you when you ran the numbers out to come up with these new numbers? Do you have the
Yes.
pro forma?
Yes, I do. We have a pro forma for the period through 2047. There's not much to add to the iBank guarantee status. What I discussed with you last week is what we've submitted to our lobbyist who's working with the state, and we've not heard anything back. So as of right now, we're going with what we've proposed till we hear different. And the financing plan has changed from when I first started talking about the transfer update because of two things: because of the lawsuit and because of the difficulty we've had with the iBank and coming to terms as to what the guarantee will be. Our current forecast has pushed the borrowing back to 2013 and 2016. And during that time, before we start borrowing, we'll be using what I call the non-clawback money from San Diego County Water Authority as that frees up for us. Now, that schedule is certainly subject to change if things turn around, such as if the litigation on the transfer gets settled sooner than that, and we're able to reach an agreement with the iBank as to what that guarantee will be, then we could be in a position to borrow earlier than 2013. Here's a summary of the revenue and expenses for the three different projections that we've made. I'll concentrate on the comparison between 2009 and 2010 projection. You'll see there the net cash has increased considerably between those two periods.
No, Dr. Brooking, on that side right there, can you tell me, I mean, maybe I forgot, what caused it from the finance projections of 04 to jump so high in 09? 010, over 100 and something million and back down to about, I see the 50 million put in, so it dropped back down to probably just under 100 million. What made that big jump in the forecast from the 04 time when this thing was signed to what you want to finance now in your projections?
As far as what we want to finance?
Your finance in 04, you projected you were going to have to finance 162 million. Something made it jump that now the projection is in 09, you're going to have to finance 283.
Right.
What made that jump?
If I could ask someone from the water department who might be able to answer that question. Otherwise, I'll have to get back with you. If
Dr. Eckhart, I think you can answer that question.
As I recall, Director Body, back in 2003, 2004, that's about the time I started working on the definite plan. And so the 162,000, although I don't remember that exact number, was an estimate as a result of signing the QSA and what we estimated was going to be built at the time. And as you recall, we were going to build a bunch of interceptors like we have now, and we had some other projects, as I recall. And so the estimate at the time was 162 million, apparently. I don't remember that exact number. Once the definite plan was completed and we had a definite project, a project that we're going to build for conservation, that's where the 283 million came from. So that's the difference between the two numbers.
Well, do you have the 2004, what you were basing that projection on, and the 2000 in a hard copy so I can do a comparison and the other board members?
I can guarantee you already have copies, but I can give you copies of 283 million. The 162 million, I'm sure I might have some old stuff that was given out to the board. Like I said, I just don't recall that exact number, but that is the difference. There was totally different projects. Once the team got in and looked at this, we found that we couldn't build some of the things, and they wouldn't produce the amount of water that we anticipated originally from the QSA program. So. But I would be happy to look that up and pass that information on to you.
Okay.
A comparison of the projection on the revenues is really before and after the settlement with the Water Authority. You can see most all of the increase or change as a result of the additional money we'll be receiving from the Water Authority. The expenses between the two projections have changed very minimally. There are still projected almost $2.3 billion of on-farm program payments. This is just a listing of right now the projects that are in the capital plan, the $283 million that will be financed. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but it totals to what we have on an earlier slide. This graph shows the cumulative impact of the net cash of what the transfer is projected to do through 2047. And you can see it's over $2.5 billion, about $2.7, $2.8 billion just from the transfer. And this is showing what's happening in the water department, excluding the transfer during the same time. As you can see, that's red and negative. So the transfer is going to be able to help offset those losses and help minimize the need for rate increases if the transfer wasn't in place.
Yeah, to emphasize that, Greg, this is if we didn't have a transfer.
That's correct.
And we left the projections on price of water to, I think at the very end it's at $25 or $26.
26, I think, yeah.
26. Okay.
What the transfer is really giving the district the opportunity to do is minimize the need to borrow for capital expenses for both the transfer and the water department for 2020 through 2047. The water transfer revenues can be utilized to meet water department's debt coverage requirements in the next few years. That is a big issue. As more water is transferred, the projection is that we'll have better debt service coverage. And the water transfer cash can be utilized to offset water department operations or shortfalls / minimize the need for rate increases.
I have a question for Mr. Rossman. Mr. Rossman, on the long-term view or long-term vision, that water rate increases, are those mainly salaries? Because we haven't really expanded our territory, our water territory, to build new canals or...
Well, I'm sure your operating costs will go up every year, even without salary increases, just cost of materials and construction costs. I think these assumptions include a rebuilding of the entire system during that 40 years,
right,
that's in place. And so, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, it's just assuming a standard cost of living, I don't know, 5% a year or something along those lines.
It's less than that. I think it's around 3%, 2.5% to 3%.
Rebuilding the entire system?
I think those are the assumptions that went into the model that the finance folks did in terms of what do we need long-term and what would this do for us, and would we need rate increases, over that length of time. And I think the basic answer is it really minimizes the rate increases.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that we have so much deferred maintenance on our system. And I know that I've written around with Mike King at sometimes, and we need to do something about the maintenance on our canals and the drains, and also put enough money in our budget for spraying. the vegetation, that has to be a priority as well. So I can see this money going into just maintaining and operating our water delivery system, and not so much for increasing salaries.
Most of the benefit from the transfer starts kicking in around 2020. As you can see from the graph, that's where you start seeing a fairly rapid increase in the accumulation. So what I'm getting at is it'll be tight over the next 8 or 9 years till you get to that point. But after that, the projections look pretty good. The challenges or risk associated with the transfer, our projections are over a long-term time span. We expect those assumptions and projections to change. They have changed. They will continue to change. We still have the QSA litigation. We need to come to an agreement with the I-Bank as to what their guarantee really means. And we'll also have to meet the water conservation levels on time to meet the contract terms. So the financing plan, I've talked about this a little. This is in a little more detail. We'll use $25 million of the $50 million that we're due to receive from the Water Authority beginning in 2011 through 2012. And then the remaining $25 million that we won't have to pay back over time, we plan on using through 2013 and 2018. That will help us lower our borrowing needs. Right now we have 2 bond issues that we're projecting, about $255 million. First one in 2013 and the second one in 2016, which I think has a build out of the project at 2018.
Right.
So here's a comparison of the impact of what Dr. Brady negotiated with the Water Authority for not only the water transfer, but that also impacted positively the water department operations. So the first line through the water transfer, we're getting additional, it's not quite $300 million, but because we're getting that additional money sooner rather than later, we are able to reduce our borrowing needs under the Water Department operations cash shortfall. So that drove that number down because we have more money and have to borrow less. So the impact of it, of the revised rates, is almost an additional $400 million that we can put into a capital upgrade / replacement fund. And then the other thing I'd like to point out there is, Mr. Ross was talking about that earlier, the forecast includes the Water Department capital replacement of almost $1.4 billion. So the transfer is projected to provide that amount of money to start replacing the system. And obviously the system won't all be replaced over the next 37 years, because obviously some of the assets have a life longer than that, but it'll certainly go a long way to starting that process. And then, if everything goes the way we're projecting, even at the end of 2047, there will be a fund available, almost $750 million, that can continue with that process. And that's the end of my presentation.
Are there any questions from the board for Mr. Broking?
I have one question. I've been asked this numerous times on the Fifth Amendment, where we virtually have a fixed pricing with the escalators.
Yes.
Is there a break-even point, say? Well, the question is asked to me, well, in the event of a drought and water pricing goes up, okay, then the front-end loading may work against us. But is there a figure where that's been calculated? What is that break-even number, as far as whether it's a good deal, a bad deal, or?
Well, we compared what our projection was before and after. we didn't really look at it as a break even. And the cash flow from after the negotiation is, the present value is in between $100 and $200 million greater.
I know it'd be tough to calculate it out because you also have the issue of less interest that you're having to pay and so forth, you know, so it's a tough one. But I was just curious if that was ever put to the test.
If I could add one other thing, with discussions with the rating agencies, we had meetings with them prior to the settlement and after the settlement. And prior to the settlement, there was a tendency not to believe the numbers that were in our forecast, even though they were lower than what we had after the settlement, because they were looking at those numbers and they knew they were based on a formula, and they were wondering, okay, yeah, whether we were really going to receive that money. But once we fix those numbers and they can see it in a contract, especially over the next 5 years, their whole attitude changed, because now they know what the escalator is going to be. They know there shouldn't be any litigation on it. Everyone's agreed through the next 5 years, and they've been very impressed with what we've been able to provide them as how we think the projections are going to work.
But it is your plan as far as expenditures goes to measure that against the validation process. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Well, I mean, we're just not going to jump in over our head right to start until we know what the validation situation.
Oh yeah, as far as as far as borrowing, my plan would be not to borrow until several or all of these issues get resolved, so we know what the risks are. Right now, it's my opinion that the risk is too great to borrow money.
Are there any questions from the public?
I had a question. I just wanted to say, Dr. Brady and Mr. Broking, I know in these negotiations with San Diego County Water Authority that you were able to get the $50 million up front. We'll get the money October the 1st, and we got another $6 million as of the end of December 31st of 2009. And I know that the way you broke this thing out on page 6, that instead of going out and borrowing the $283 million now to try to build this project, we're going to go a little bit slower, use some of the $50 million, and take this thing at a little bit of a slower pace, but still be able to deliver the water in a timely manner. So I want to commend you on the effort in your negotiations with San Diego County Water Authority to be able to come up with another $391 million, even though it's over the life of the project for 37 years. But I think it's been very helpful, because the fear of the public and the board has been going out and borrowing a whole bunch of money, and something go haywire, and then we're sitting there holding the bag. So I think you've done a good job in putting this together, and hopefully everything works out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments from the public?
Anthony, is this appropriate to ask Greg a question
Go ahead, yeah.
about? Where do I do that, here? Or
State your name and address for the record, please. Yeah.
Tom Havens, Montana. Greg, the original premise was to borrow money first, then conserve the water. Is that correct? And what was your assumption? You mentioned assumptions on the, say, the price of water in 45 years.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I have a spreadsheet in my briefcase that shows that level of detail. So I'd be happy to get with you after the meeting and show you that.
I'd like to see that. And what is the cost of conservation, and does that take into account the replacement costs during this period of time up to 2045?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by the cost of conservation.
Well, you're selling conserved water.
Yes.
There has to be a cost to create that conserved water, and there has to be replacement costs for the infrastructure of that component of that conserved water.
Our forecast, I believe, starts with $250 an acre foot, and it's escalated, I'm going to say, at 3% a year. It could be 2%.
Okay, so it would double, the price would, the cost to conserve the water would double then in approximately 15 years. Is that about right?
No, I don't think it would double that quick, but that's another thing that I have in my spreadsheet, and I can show you by year
Okay.
what the assumptions are.
Okay, and the figure of, on here of an extra $390 million, that's based on, again, the assumption you're going to show me of what you think the price of water is going to be in 45 years so that you can tell me how you calculate that figure?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Ronnie?
Ronnie Langerber, Holtville. I know there was a lot of talk in Rodney Smith's presentation on the value of our priority on water and the value in shortage years. And I'm wondering at the current level of the river today, I know there was a level where it was determined to be shortage, and our value would double or almost triple on those years where it was shortage because of our priority of water was so good. I'm wondering how these new projections with the current level of the rivers, with the current level of the reservoirs, would have been the old pricing structure and are currently now with this new negotiated settlement at the current levels of the river today. Not forecasted, not projected, but the current levels of the reservoirs today. Because I believe we're in a shortage criteria. And what premium we get during a shortage year, and what the premium's going to be under this new pricing structure.
David Osias. Yeah, well, it's a contract term that I think I want to tell you. There was no shortage premium for the first 15 years. So if the river was in shortage today, the premium would be zero, because we're only in year 8.
Year 8, the shortage premium
Kicks in year 16.
Year 2016.
No, 16 years from when the deal started. So
was
2019.
19.
So without looking at projections, the answer is zero. There was a projection of how often a shortage would occur and what the premium would be, and that was in the 2004 projections that Mr. Broking did. Okay.
There is Ian Wells, Finance Department. There is in the projection Rod Smith calculated the likelihood of a shortage premium, and that is in the projection.
Hold on, Oscar. Ronnie?
How did the new pricing structure, how did that affect the price under shortage years in 2019 or whenever that year could begin? What is our current shortage premium now, or what is it going to be? Is there a shortage premium in the clause, in the contract price?
You mean in the, go ahead, Mr. Brady.
Greg's.
Well, yes, there is a shortage premium in what we negotiated through 2034. That's reflected in the price that they're paying. And then beginning in 2035, the contract reverts back to the original formula.
You said there currently is a shortage premium in the 2034?
It's rolled into the rate that they're paying. It's not a separate line item in the cost, but it was part of our negotiation and capturing that when we negotiated with them.
So if my numbers are right, on a 35-year contract, we gave up all of our potential shortage premiums for a $400 million additional revenue. So about $1 million a year on 35 years, 37 years. So So our shortage premium will not modify for until 2047?
No. No.
Do you want to? Sorry,
I
no,
want-
Oscar. We'll finish with Ronnie, and then we'll move on to you.
Let me just give you the dates again, okay? Right. Under the pre-settlement structure, the shortage premium was 0 until 2019, okay? 18? Pardon me, 2018. Then the amount of the shortage premium could be as low as 5% of the price and as high as 100%. Okay, would never be triple. I think you had mentioned 3 times.
Double.
It could be as high as double, it could be as low as 5% more, depending upon the degree of shortage and where the shortage was. Okay, there's a shortage on the Colorado that would trigger it at one level, a shortage on the Sacramento River, San Joaquin River main system, it would trigger one. Both of those are at the low level. Rationing by San Diego would be at the high level. And it would graduate from, I think, if I recall, 30% to 100%, depending upon the rationing. There was a projection done, this is what Mr. Broking's talking about. There was a projection done about how many times that premium would be triggered between 2018 and 2034, and when it was triggered, at what level? 5%, 50%, 100%. And what was the base rate projection? And that was then converted into the negotiated price rate plus escalation, which is how Mr. Broking answered the question. It was taken into account and made less uncertain as to frequency or amount based on projections. And so now, until 2036, pardon me, until 2035,
right.
I'm off by a year for some reason, there is no additional payment other than the price plus escalation, okay? And then it all reverts back to the original formula. So those are the dates and the amounts, okay?
So it doesn't matter what happens with our water situation on the river until 2035, our prices are set in this new negotiated contract.
Correct.
That just bothers me a bunch, because that was a big selling point that Rodney Smith sold us to the Valley. That if our economic prosperity in this valley doubles, triples as a farmer during time of shortages, because we had such high priority secured water, high priority water. So when the Central California, when the rest of the country was in a drought, we could usually kick in and we could produce the crop and we could benefit from these shortages around the nation. And I find that with our high priority water. And I find that odd that our district is willing to, for a $400 million increase on these are in thousands of dollars, so a $1 billion project, $1 billion revenues. Am I right with my numbers? 3 zeros? I don't know. I can't count once I get that many zeros. But it just seems odd that we've given up all of our shortage premium. I know for $400 million and for such a long period of time. And I wonder, as a farmer, how that's going to affect, if the river gets allocated or if the river gets short and I need, every acre foot of water I get is more valuable when the prices get higher than the prices are cheaper. And that's how that's going to affect my potential profit 10, 20 years from now. And the district is capped. I think there was a big program at Farm Bureau, don't cap our future. I think that's what the district did. They capped our future. The district negotiating team capped any potential future revenue. They've limited. And how they can say that in 2035 we're going to revert back to the old pricing when in 3 years into the deal, they couldn't settle on a price, what it meant then. You know, they started this thing in 2007 or whatever, and in 2010, they're already in litigation on the pricing. But miraculously, we're going to go back to the original agreement in 2035. Sounds like some attorneys are going to make some money then, renegotiating the price then. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom? Oscar.
Oscar Gonzalez, you know, El Centro. You know, the projections, they're suspect as far as I'm concerned, because nobody can predict an earthquake. Nobody can predict what's going to happen a year from now. But yet we cap, and it sounds like fine and dandy, 400 million or whatever we cap. Hey, but with the economy, inflation running rampant every year, how can you predict and project and say, and then we're going to go back to in 2032, we're going to go back to the same formula? You know, it's less than ridiculous. You know, it seems to me that I think they try. This gentleman that worked for the IID, he tried. He did a very good job. But I think he failed, because there's no way you can predict and say, it sounds very, oh man, we're going to get $4 million. And yeah, we got a cap, and in 2032, we're going to go back to the same formula. There's nothing. Hey, can you imagine what 1911 when IID started and they would have said that? Hey, they've been wrong. Look at if you look at the history of IID from 1911 to right now, there's no way that you can predict that. And even 5 years from now, look at it and make an analysis of what the price of water and how the economy fluctuates. Good times, I guess farmers make more money. Just like Juan Lemos, who's in jail as a drug lord, he makes more money when he's inside prison than he does outside. So, you know, the issue here is, let's get back to basics and let's figure it out accurately, at least fairly. But for 32 years, come on. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the public before Tom? Go ahead, Tom.
Mr. Garber, is Amendment 5 in any way legally liable to the invalidation of the other 12 contracts?
If a contract is invalid, then arguably the amendment would be amending an invalid contract. So it would create a legal problem, of course.
It would?
Yeah.
Well, that might be very fortunate, because the priority of water, the difference between the first priority of water and the 10th priority of water may be 10 times. If you're a city and you run out of water, for example, San Diego, you're talking about, over this period of time, approximately $22 or $23 billion worth of lost regional product. So therefore, to have a drought protection like they do, without a substantial premium for the IID, which would not have that water, is something I hope that it's possible to renegotiate.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions from the public? All right, move on to, I think it's Part B.
Yeah, Part B, and we have
David Osias.
Mr. Osias.
You got your PowerPoint?
Yeah.
You got it?
David Osias. It's members of the board and Mr. Brady and other staff and the public. It's been a while since there's been a public session on the status of the QSA, so I was invited to give a few comments on where it sits today and what's going on. As you know, it's been the subject of much discussion, email, letter writing, articles. There was litigation over the validity of the QSA, and 2 documents resulted. One is called a judgment and one is called a decision. And as you can see from the first bullet, as a result of the judgment, the trial court determined that the state promised to pay QSA mitigation costs above the amount paid for by IID Coachella in San Diego, if there are any, is unconstitutional and therefore held the QSA invalid. Note that it was over QSA mitigation costs. The trial court judgment is not about salton sea restoration. Second, there was a lengthy decision. The judgment itself is I think, only a couple pages. The trial court also wrote a 20 to 30 page decision where he ruled on some things and didn't rule on some things. He did rule that the IID had the power to do a QSA type deal. That was a challenge that was raised. He did rule that allocation to farmers was not required before IID did a transfer deal. He ruled that no conflicts invalidated the QSA. That had been alleged. He ruled that the Irrigation District Act controls this board's decision-making process by majority vote, not a trust law concept where the vote had to be unanimous. And the Imperial Group farmers' claim for $25 billion was dismissed and earlier in the case, and that was all the prior orders were included in the decision. He didn't rule on these 3 things. When I say he didn't rule, I don't mean he ruled against the IID, nor did he rule for the IID, nor did he rule against the farmers, nor did he rule for the farmers. He did not rule at all. He said, I'm not ruling. He dismissed the CEQA challenges and other environmental challenges as moot. He said, I've decided the QSA is invalid for constitutional reasons. I'm not going to address the environmental challenges. So that's an undecided matter. He did not rule on the adequacy of IID's public notices before it voted to approve the QSA. A challenge has been raised saying that the notice was inadequate. He didn't rule one way or the other. Also, a challenge was raised that the agreements changed in a material way after the IID board approved them. He didn't rule on that. So we have a judgment, and we have a decision with rulings, and we have an appeal. And so if you look on the screen, you can see the parties to these, to the appellate process. The appellants are IID, Coachella, San Diego, Metropolitan, the Vista Irrigation District, the City of Escondido, and the State of California. Respondents, meaning they oppose the appeal, Imperial County, Air District, the Imperial Group Farmers, Cuatro del Mar. And then there was a cross appeal. Now, the cross appeal deals with the dismissal of the environmental cases, saying that he shouldn't have dismissed them. And that cross appeal was filed by Imperial County, the Air District, and a entity of some kind named Power. While the appeal was pending, the appellate court ordered on May 7th that the judgment was stayed. That means that the judgment's not in effect while the appeal is pending. And that stay will last until the appellate process is complete. The stay was requested by IID and the other QSA parties. It was opposed by the county, the Air District, the Imperial Group Farmers, and Cuatro del Mar. And as a result of the stay, while the appeal is pending, the QSA water transfers continue, the payments for the water transfers continue, the environmental mitigation continues, the payments for the environmental mitigation continues, and the IID continues to report on all of this to the State Board annually as required. Here's the schedule now for the appeal. Let me comment on each of them for 1 minute. The appellate court has set the deadline, this is a hard deadline, September 27th, 2010, for appellants to file their opening briefs. They could file them sooner, but that's the last day. You can see that the schedule on the slide, assumes that all the filings are on the last day because each of these other dates for briefs are linked to the brief before it. So if the appellants file their opening briefs on the 27th, then the opposition briefs and the cross-appeal briefs are due on October 27th. And if they're filed on that day, Then the appellant's reply briefs and cross-appeal opposition briefs are due on November 16th. Then there's Thanksgiving. And then the cross-appeal reply briefs are due December 6th. Now, these last two items are not fixed. Those are just my best guess, that because the briefs won't be completed until December 6th, that there's not likely to be oral argument before the appellate court in December. It's got to read what everybody submitted, analyze it, think about it, prepare questions that it wants to address at oral argument. And so I expect oral argument to be in the first quarter of 2011. That is very, very fast. Most appellate cases take years. In fact, if you recall, when the County of Imperial was dismissed, had its environmental claims dismissed, it took 2 years to resolve that, even though it was on an expedited schedule. The appellate court, though, when it issued the stay, said it wanted to decide this case, this QSA case, as fast as it could. I'm taking them at their word. I expect oral argument to be in the first quarter. If it's not in the first quarter, the decision will be postponed too. But if it is in the first quarter, I expect them to come out with a decision in the second quarter. Again, a very fast schedule, but they've said they wanted to do this as quickly as possible. They even said to all the parties, please don't ask us for any extensions, which is normal in an appellate process. People always ask for extensions. They've cautioned people not to do that. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about amicus briefs, so I thought I'd put up just 3 basic points about amicus briefs. They may be filed by interested non-parties. Obviously, the parties to the appeal have the right to file in a brief. An amicus can only be filed if the appellate court grants permission. So you file an application and you say to the appellate court, here's why we're interested, here's what we want to talk about, can we be an amicus? And the appellate court says yes or no. The rules, the appellate court rules, require that any party filing an amicus brief has to identify on the cover of the application, so it's not buried inside, and the cover of the brief, again, so it's not hidden inside, which party to the appeal the amicus supports. So remember my listing of parties. Anyone who wants to be an amicus has to identify which of these appellants or respondents or cross-appellants the amicus is filed in support of. The third rule is that both the appellate briefs by the parties and the amicus briefs are limited to the rulings of the trial court and the issues on appeal. That makes sense because the appellate court is only going to address those issues. Let me go back. I don't have a schedule on here, you'll note, for when amicus briefs are due. And that's because the application has to be in at a time that's certainly before December 6th and informs the appellate court what the amicus intends to address and who they support and what issues are of concern to them. And then the appellate court accepts it or not. So somewhere in this process is when an application would go in. It certainly can't go in later than December 6th. Typically, but not required, they're filed with the side that they're joining. So if they're joining in opposition to the appellants, they would typically file their application in October here. But if they're not sure, I guess they might file later. All right, so what's the status of the QSA? Well, I'll start with what's the effect of the appeal? We know it's stayed, so during the appeal, the QSA is continuing. But I've heard people say you can't do things or you must do things because of the appeal, and neither of those are right. The appeal itself does not require or preclude the QSA parties, from exploring consensual modifications to address matters of concern. It doesn't prohibit it, it doesn't preclude it. I don't know why people say it does. Second, IID is evaluating ideas on matters of concern, like how do we make the QSA mitigation funding more certain? IID is also disappointed, as is most of the communities that are surrounding the Salton Sea, and as are most of the environmental groups in the state. They're disappointed that the state has done little to fulfill its responsibility with respect to the Salton Sea. So IID is evaluating ideas how to increase the chances for the state to do that. So what are some of the ideas that are being kicked around? Well, payment certainty would increase if the cost of mitigation was less, or if mitigation approaches were more informed now that we've been doing it for 7 years, or we can find ways to create less impacts. And I've given an example in each of these bullets. So for example, mitigation costs less if when you have Colorado River water available that you don't need to store, or you don't have storage available yet, and you don't need to use, you could use that for mitigation, and that's cheaper than creating mitigation water, say, by fallowing. And we're trying to estimate how often that would be and how much savings that would result in. Mitigation approach can change. You'll remember that the IID is under the state board order, putting water in the Salton Sea as mitigation and required to do so. But the environment could benefit and the costs could be less if instead of putting water to the sea, or instead of putting some water in the sea, a saline complex habitat was built instead. We know that different forms of water conservation for transfer have different environmental impacts. What would be the effect of leaving 10% of the 303,000 acre feet per year to be created by fallowing versus 0%? Okay, we actually have analyzed that. 3,500 acres of playa would not be exposed by that one change. There are other pros and cons of that. There's no recommendation. That's just one of the items being looked at. Now, Salton Sea restoration. This is, again, it's not irrelevant. It's related to all the problems that we're talking about, but it's itself something different than the QSA mitigation. There is not any contractual QSA mitigation obligation or other obligation to restore the Salton Sea. It's just not there. There is a law that was passed, though, at the same time IID was doing the QSA that said the state is solely responsible to restore the Salton Sea. If the state does that, by the way, the definition of restoration we'll talk about in 1 second, but if the state does that, the cost of QSA mitigation is less. That's helpful. Why does that happen? Well, if the state is creating habitat or preserving the sea or preserving a smaller sea with habitat, then the QSA doesn't have to do the same thing. Now, these last 2 points seem to be often forgotten. The Salton Sea habitat values are declining with and without the QSA. That's why the state needs to do something about it. If the QSA takes care of its impact, there's still impact that's happening independent of the QSA. Same thing with the playa. It's going to be exposed with or without the QSA. It's only the QSA impacts that the QSA mitigates. The state needs to take care of these last 2 items that happen without the QSA, and they've been slow to get started. So what of since 2003, where there's been a lot of mitigation activity and a lot of studying and a lot of biologists and air science people looking at, what do we know more now than we knew in 2002 when the review was done? Well, we know that that when you expose the playa around the sea, it's not 100% emissive. Not every square foot of it creates dust. Nor do we think that none of it does. The experts believe that somewhere between 30 and 60% of the exposed playa will emit dust in wind events, or 40 to 70% won't. These are just the converse of each other. If you're half full, glass is half full, you think it's 40 to 70% won't. If your glass is half empty, you think 30 to 60% will. That's what needs to be mitigated, not 100% of the exposed playa, only the emissive portions. The law requiring the state to be responsible for Salton Sea restoration makes the top 2 priorities habitat preservation or creation, that's for species, wildlife, and air pollution prevention, the top 2 priorities. That's what the law says. We have done, not me, obviously, biologists and other sort of consultants, environmental consultants with environmental agencies have looked at developing habitat through saline complex, which is ponds. And if you put that on emissive playa, you A, create habitat, and B, prevent air pollution, and it can be done cheaper, and it can be done sooner, and it's actually better habitat than trying to preserve the elevation or the salinity in the existing sea. So one of the ideas we're evaluating is how to get the state to refocus its restoration alternatives on the top 2 priorities, habitat creation and air mitigation. There are work groups by IID staff with consultants evaluating each of these, the impacts of them, the dollars. No recommendations to the board yet. We hope to get back to you within the next 1 to 2 months with a proposal. It needs to be visited with the other QSA agencies, with environmental groups, and with presumably elected officials at the state level. If it's this year, the existing ones. If it's next year, the newly elected ones. That's where we are. Questions?
Questions from the board?
Yeah, David, on the use of underrun or unused entitlement into the Salt Sea.
This idea here?
I know that Met didn't like that idea when it came up, but we've got problems with the playa out there, which you've discussed here about using saline water or whatever to cover the playa. So legitimately, we can make use of that water as long as we're using it for special projects and that, correct?
Well, the projects need to be mitigation projects,
right?
Okay, rather than say restoration projects. So we are using it. Just so people know, the IID irrigates its marsh. It irrigates some replacement habitat on the All-American Canal. It uses Colorado River water. Okay, and it can do that for exposed playa caused by the QSA also, when it doesn't need it for farming and storage is not yet available. Those are in discrete amounts, though. You don't determine how much to mitigate by saying how much is available, that's what we'll use. You say what's required to mitigate, and it's those specific impacts that you use the water for. Yeah, and you're right. Met didn't like reading about that in the newspaper or in any other fashion, and have made contact with the IID to complain. The board knows, maybe the public does not remember, that in the QSA agreements, the use of Colorado River water, not needed for other purposes, for mitigation of the QSA, Met promised not to object. So maybe that doesn't mean complain, but after we get done with their complaining, they're not supposed to object.
Any other questions from the board before we move on to public comment? Okay.
You want me to sit over here and let the questions be up here? Would that work better?
No, let me sit over there.
Oscar has to sit over there.
Do you mind if I ask you the question from right here?
You need to state your name and address for the record.
He wants to ask me from his comfortable seat. That's okay with me. I'll repeat the question if that's okay, because you don't have a microphone.
That's right. Mr. Osai, since the inception of this litigation, since Horton, Knox, Carter, and who's the other one? I'm sorry?
Foot?
Foot. Yeah, Pata. Oh, Pia. Pata is vulgar and Pia is Castilian Spanish. Let me say this. Since the inception, when you guys came in, how much has it cost the taxpayer, you and me, money, in terms of litigation? How much has it cost? Number one, maybe Mr. Brady or maybe Mr. Jennings.
It was just in the newspaper, Oscar.
I realize, but I'm asking right now. And I don't need those comments from you, sarcastic comments. I'm asking him.
I don't think he knows how much we've been reimbursed by insurance.
Is that the end of your, you want me to repeat your question now for everybody?
Yes, please.
Okay, so tell me if I get it wrong. Since Horton, Knox, Carter, and Foote, were replaced by my firm, how much has it cost the taxpayers of this county for the legal services I've provided
Specifically, you and the consultants that you've hired.
and the consultants that I've hired?
Yes,
Okay.
people
Is that a fair repeat of your question?
Is that, do you understand the question?
Yeah, I do understand the
Do you
question.
think it's an okay question?
Only if you think my answer will be an okay answer.
I will assume yes.
Okay, then it's an okay question. I believe the total costs, at least for attorney's fees, I don't know about the consultants. I don't think we've actually hired them. But for the attorney's fees, I think the total unreimbursed by insurance is about $1.5 million. But I have to admit, I read that in the newspaper and haven't independently tried to
don't
verify
read the
that.
paper.
Okay, so I think that's what they reported. I have not checked.
Okay, thank you.
Is that an okay answer?
Hey, A plus.
Very good. Okay.
That is coming from the San Diego Water transfer itself, though, as well, right?
Pardon me?
The money's coming from the San Diego Water transfer.
Oh, yes, actually. And that's the unreimbursed cost. I guess your question was how much of the taxpayers paid. That would be a totally different answer. I'm unaware of the taxpayers having paid any of that.
Any more questions from the public?
Now, you want to use this, so do you want me to sit over here?
Interrogate you, so you sit down.
Tom, let's
Tom
keep it to the
Havens,
issue at
Montana.
hand.
Make sure you ask me if the questions are okay.
Okay, I definitely will. See if this question's okay. The federal government and state governments, politicians often pass thousands and thousands of projects every year which are unfunded. And they're never funded, and they never will be funded. So my question is, if the state says that they have a financial obligation, what does that really mean in terms of reality? When, especially in the view of the fact that California is essentially bankrupt, and you're an expert in that area.
Yes.
The state is bankrupt.
I don't think is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
And state politicians may, in fact, create a some sort of a.
Tom, is that question more for the board on whether we should be going forward with this? He's our lawyer to advise us what the law is. And obviously, if there's legislation in the QSA saying that the state is responsible, there is an opportunity for the IID to sue. And I think that's what we hire Mr. Osias for, is to help us in court proceedings. But on perception that whether we should be moving forward with it, that's not the issue right now. That should probably be held in public comments. So if you can ask questions that where you see what you think might go wrong with this particular policy, but not perception on whether we should move forward on whether the state's going to go broke or their ability to pay. I think that's more perception.
All right, I'll ask the question a different way. Does the state have any financial responsibility to the Imperial Irrigation District on the QSA?
They have a contingent contractual obligation that at the moment the judge said was unconstitutional.
And if you were my attorney, I would ask you if they had any liability on any obligation that they state, unless there was an actual fund set up, isolated, indemnified from any possibility of any other state legislators taking the funds out of the fund that was designated for the Imperial Irrigation District through legislation or other means.
I'm not sure I understood your question.
Well, what's the safety and what's the practical reality of listening to the state say we'll spend $9 billion to restore or mitigate the Salton Sea? What does that really mean?
All right. That's a very helpful clarification, okay? So I'm going to give you a two-part answer. Will you let me get both parts out?
You do it.
All right. For QSA mitigation, which does not include Salton Sea restoration, the state promised in a contract to pay. It's the promise that the judge had trouble with. And at the time they promised, they had a appropriated fund to pay with, okay? So that when the IID approved the bill, that there was a continuing appropriation in the Department of Fish and Game available to pay that.
But
money.
unfunded?
No, appropriated and funded, okay? It was canceled
Okay.
afterwards, okay?
Okay.
All right, so that's the answer to the first part. The answer to the second part is there is no QSA obligation of any kind between any party, including the state, to IID, or running the other direction. No contractual obligations whatsoever regarding Salton Sea restoration. Okay? The state didn't promise to pay $9 million. The state didn't promise to pay $1. Okay? Restoration is needed because the Salton Sea is dying independent of the QSA. And without the QSA, it will die.
So the area
And with the QSA, it may die.
Okay, so the area of origin, unfortunately, is left holding the empty Salton Sea or the destroyed Salton Sea.
It's not
if you will.
dying because when you say area of origin, for those who don't know what that means, that's a phrase used as the place where water is transferred from. And it's used in connection with impacts of the transfer. Classic area of origin is you transfer the water away and the area has no water left, and that's an impact. Okay. The Salton Sea is dying not because of the transfers. You stop the transfers, the Salton Sea is dying. It's been dying for 30 years. It'll continue to die whether there's any transfer or not. So the phrase area of origin, okay, being left with the impacts, is a non sequitur. It suggests that it's linked to the transfers, and it's not. The sea's death is because every acre foot of water that IID brings into the valley to use has salt in it. And the salt goes into the sea and never leaves. That's why it's supersaline. It also gets water from sources, not just the IID, which have all gone down in volume. Mexican flows are way down. Farmers this year, as you know so well, have farmed less. When they farm less, the sea gets less water and goes down. Has nothing to do with the transfer.
Okay, but the practical issue is that the liability would more than likely go on the rest of our lives, because if the Salton Sea dies and the hundreds of thousands and millions of birds that use that as a flyway are affected, there are untold number of environmental groups who may or may not choose that to be an issue. Again, that's the area of origin, which is the Imperial Valley. Is that not an issue to be concerned about?
Oh, it's very much been an issue and remains an issue to be concerned about. It's just not an issue that the QSA can solve. It
Well,
happens independent of the QSA.
I'm just trying to be very practical. If water leaves the valley, and theoretically, if there is less valley in the valley, less water goes into the Salton Sea dies faster, the Salton Sea is going to die as you have placed. There are a lot of people in the world that don't know the facts that would be party to lawsuits in the future of the area of origin, which unfortunately is the Imperial Irrigation District, which unfortunately is a huge liability. And unless these are things that are very clearly spelled out, then the IID is going to be in legal problems for the rest of our lives. Unless that's
The problem with your analysis is it causes a causal connection that
I'm
isn't
asking
there.
questions. I'm not analyzing.
I understand, but if you ask me, how high can I jump when I'm on the moon, the answer is, I can't get to the moon. It's a stupid question, okay? So if you tell me that water users here are going to have to pay to restore the Salton Sea, and therefore it's a liability of the IID, okay, because the Salton Sea is dying anyway, okay, it's a false assumption, okay? It is a problem. Environmentalists are concerned. This board is very concerned. Apparently you are concerned. Okay, you're concerned. I assume everybody in this room is concerned. Riverside County is concerned. The state said it was concerned, but hasn't done anything about it. Okay, but none of that means that its death is caused by the QSA.
Okay, I understand that, but let's get back to my question. If the state allocated some amount of money for the restoration or the mitigation of the Salton Sea, unless that money was in a specific set-aside actual fund, real money, that could not be taken away by other political subdivisions of the state.
Tom, I think it's the board policy to mitigate the sea under the contract. The contract does call to mitigate the sea.
No. The contract was invalidated.
All right.
That's all.
Thank
you.
Now he has follow-up.
Go
You want
ahead,
him
Oscar.
to wait for everybody else?
I don't call it something, I call it the Dead Sea. And, you know, what is the significance of that promise that the state made to IID? What is the significance legally?
Which promise?
Where they said they were gonna restore or help them out with funds and stuff like that. And then you said, on the other hand, you said independent, are they independent?
Oscar, I know, but we need to move forward. In his presentation, there was, because you stepped out of the room, there was a bullet point in there, there's legislation. And so that's the that was the promise that the state made by creating legislation. I know I'm going to go ahead and answer for it, so because David likes to talk a lot. So, is there another question? Do you have another question?
Let me repeat your question for everybody, and if I get it wrong, then you'll correct me. Okay? The question was, they turn off automatically. They must time out. What is the liability to the IID because there was no environmental impact report done 5 years ago before the water transfer? Okay. The answer is there was an environmental impact report done before the transfer, and because of that environmental impact report, it's the reason that IID is, and others, are doing mitigation of those impacts and getting paid for doing that mitigation.
Thank you, Oscar. Are there any other questions from the public? Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Tom Sefton from Brawley, California. Quick question for Mr. David Asias. After 2017, under the QSA, assuming it is validated and your legal process goes forward successfully, mitigation flows are stopped, and if the state continues to be in a situation where it is unable to financially handle a restoration effort by that time, would that reduction in mitigation flows have an impact on the increase in salinity of the Salton Sea, and would it have an impact in increasing the rate at which the Salton Sea declines in level and Playa is exposed?
The short answer is yes. If mitigation water ceases at the end of 2017, as the mitigation plan currently reads, and that's as a result of the state board order, not a contract, okay, then the rate of salinity increase will be faster for a while, and the elevation decline will be faster for a while. They'll both reach the same place they would have gotten to anyway, but it will get there sooner. So in other words, if the sea was going to drop, independent of the QSA, if it was going to drop 10 feet, and it was going to take 20 years to drop 10 feet, it'll now maybe only take 16 years. In other words, it won't drop farther, but it'll drop faster, and the salinity won't go higher. It'll just get to the same height more quickly. I don't remember how much more quickly, but we have a graph that shows that. That's what you're asking about, right?
Essentially, yes. Now, if the water transfers are ongoing, they're scheduled to be in place for 75 years.
No.
Or not?
No, not 75 years.
How long?
45 years from 2003.
Okay. So after 45 years, the water transfers would have to be renegotiated from zero, or what's the status?
After 45 years, if everyone agrees to renew on the same terms, then they're renewed on the same terms. If not, then they have to be renegotiated.
Would the IID have the power to insist upon a renegotiation to improve environmental situation at that
IID
time?
could say we don't want to do another deal for any reason.
Okay. And final question, as a representative of IID in this litigation. Assuming the state continues to be in a difficult financial situation, what's your vision of what the future is for the Salton Sea?
Well, I'm not a vision person.
Okay, a non-answer. Thank you.
Well, I think the future financial decision will be made by this governing board in the future on our debt to income ratio, our expenses, et cetera, et cetera. The water transfer is a totally different subject, and obviously the Salton Sea is a priority, which is why we want to stick to what the original agreement had, was to mitigate the air impacts and the sea. Are there any other questions? Oscar, I think that's it. Next time.
Victor Robout from Holtville. On this QSA, you believe that it's good for the land here in Imperial Valley and for the people here? Mr. Osiris?
Do I think the QSA agreements are beneficial to the Imperial Irrigation District and therefore to the people it serves? Yes.
Okay. And how much property have you bought here in Imperial Valley?
What? In my lifetime? Or
recently, since you've been working for the IID?
None.
Okay. Now, if
and
you
before,
were to take,
and before that? None.
Right. So it can't be that it's going to profit that much off of these, or otherwise it'd be a good investment, wouldn't you say?
No, actually, it could be the world's best investment.
And I wouldn't buy it here for the very reason that you would stand there and tell me that my advice to the board is to try to do something for my land.
Yeah.
I don't need that kind of.
Okay. Well, I've watched you in court, and I watch how you put these programs together in these papers, and it's beautiful. You sell the board, you sell all the people in the community, and you sell the Imperial Valley Press. But I'd like to know how much of a wager of your personal money you'll put on the outcome of the QSA, and I'll take the bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Oscar? One question. You've had a lot more time than everybody else. Go ahead. I haven't. Go ahead. One more question. Is that your question? Your personal amendment is your question?
You know, Mr. Mendio came out with a tremendous idea, I think a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know if it's relevant, Mr. Mendio, and maybe you can correct me, but I think I wasn't here that day. But through the grapevine, I heard that you were proposing to, instead of giving the water, we give 250,000 acres of water to LA. If you wanted to get some of that water, go to South Sea, that was a tremendous idea. Wasn't that basically your idea?
Yeah, we just got finished discussing it here with Mr. Osai. Yeah, no, I said we put some of the underrun water into the Salton Sea, not the whole 235,000.
You were the phone and you disagreed, but I want to make it public that it seems to me that before, IID has a lot of land that could be farmed. I think that, I mentioned over the phone to you, that land could be sold to the farmers locally. Then when they get done with that water could go to Salton Sea, but you told me no. Why?
The land, you mean the land, the trust land's water?
After if the farmers bought that land, that free water that we're giving to the LA, NWD, 250 million square feet of free water. If I don't know what percent you were talking about getting that free water to go to Salton Sea, and I said to myself, if it was, I think it would be reasonable to stipulate that free water could be sold to the farmers locally, not the independent farmers the absentee landowners, but I'm talking about the local farmers, especially the ones that are struggling, would get that water, use it, and after they use it could go to South Sea, but you said no, that wasn't a good idea.
No, you mean the underrun water, just let the farmers have it to use on their farms instead of it going to MWD.
Yes.
There's some rules and regulations on the use on that water.
No, I think he's talking about new farmers, people who otherwise can't afford to farm, have land that's not currently in production, put it in production. And the problem is that water doesn't show up every year. It's very hard to keep.
That's the question that I'm asking.
It's very hard to keep land productive if it can only get water, every third year or every fourth year, nor could you make a living if you plant something and then the water doesn't show up. Underrun is not predicted.
Mr. Osias, you're in situous. You know what in situous means?
Oscar.
In situation.
Thank you, but
I don't know what that means.
It's not a bad idea. I mean, I think we all want to help new business, startup business, but they have to plan for the future. If you have somebody who's a brand new farmer and is looking to start something for 1 year, maybe we can do something then. But all right. Thank you, Oscar. We are moving. Does anybody other have questions for
We're on item
David Osias in the public?
Item number 13, Mr. President, members. Internal audit, general matters.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. We don't have anything to report at this time unless you have any questions for internal audit.
You're on later.
The board have any questions for internal auditor? Moving forward to water general matters. Thank you.
Mr. Ross.
Yes, Mr. President. We received a request during the week from Director Hanks wanting some information on our vegetation management program. So I'm going to ask the program manager, David Watson, to come up and go over some of the questions that were raised.
Oh, I have to.
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break, then we'll come back. Water general matters, Mr. Rawson?
Yes, and we have David Watson up here. Dave, you ready to wow him?
Good afternoon, directors. My name is David Watson. I'm the project manager for the vegetation management unit. This afternoon, I'm going to discuss the herbicide spray contract and also talk a little bit about the vegetation control and where we plan on going. This is the order that the spray contract, since the IID turned it over to the spray contractor. IID in 2001 contracted out for $1,600,000. And after that 1 year, in 2002 to 2004, it was a 3 years contract for amount of $1,666,333. In 2005, a bid of invitation went out and was awarded $1,119,000. And in 2005, as a 1 year extension was awarded for the 2006 budget. And after that, it was an extension for 2007, 2011, and for the same amount of $1,119,000.
Bless you.
And in the same year of 2006, the board approved a Timbers program, which, by the way, is an excellent program. I appreciate the directors approving that, for $345,000 per year to cover material only. And then back in 2008, was a proposal to increase the spray contract for 2009 budget, but it was removed due to lack of funding. Some of the things that the water department are doing is we are developing a grain cleaning list, which we are working out that this year off of the 2010 list. So each year we're going to try to develop a cleaning schedule so that wherever the cleaning take place, we will try to get right behind it to do some spraying. So mechanically remove a vegetation from the grain canal. And the GPS was approved by the State Water Resource Control Board. And so we are going to have the GPS system available probably the last quarter of this year. And we do have some ground crew out doing vegetation control. And like I said, that once the grains are clean and lateral, we're going to get in there and try to do a follow-up on with spray herbicide. We want to evaluate different type of chemical Right now, we are using glyphosate, and we want to try to find what chemical work best, and we have to be very careful because of the unique situation here in the valley because of irrigation. We don't get our canals out every 3 months so you can do maintenance, so we have to do the maintenance with water in. So I'm trying to find different type of chemical that we will work around water, and that's very difficult at this point in time because most of the labor I come across with is say do not spray in or near water. And then they also have a little section there for irrigation purposes. So I'm working with manufacturer and everyone else to try to find some type of chemical we can use on the irrigation side. We want to modify the herbicide equipment for special situation. And I have a couple of pictures there I want to show you what we are doing to modify those equipment. Continuation of the Tamarisk program, that's a plus. Increase spray program to spray at least twice a year. And my intention is get a year-round program and we'll get everything under control.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Question, please. Spray program, spray at least twice a year. Is that all the vegetation or certain parts?
I would like to say that it depends on what area are we trying to, what plant we're trying to control. It might take more than twice to get it under control. So what I mean by twice a year is my interpretation is year round. So I can go back and hit that a third time, either a fourth time if the labor require me to do it, because on the label on some of the chemical, it have the maximum amount of application rate per acre per year.
Okay.
So I have to be very careful how much I spray in different areas.
Mr. Watson, you talked about not being able to spray in the lateral because of the water that's in them, but you're taking the laterals out four times a year, maybe 5 times a year. It seems to me it could be scheduled this spring when you're taking them out. But I think they take the laterals out 4 to 5 times a year.
That's a very good point, and we could be looking at that. It depends on what type of vegetation you're trying to control. If the woody plants, then you have some chemical that you need to leave the canal out at least 3 months in order to get water back in. Like habitat in Massapir, that's 120 days that you can't touch that ditch. So it's very difficult to trying to get in there when the canals are out, and only spray glyphosate is only going to take care of some broadleaves, but some of the woody plants it probably won't have no effect on it, unless we get in there and clean it out and then come back in on it and spray it when the canal is out. This is the map of the district service area. And right now, if I can get this pointer going, right now they have a crew up in the Calipat area. And what the plans are is to, once they get finished cleaning that, they want to come down in this area here and start cleaning down towards the south to the border. And then from that point, they want to go over and then back up. Planned action is to develop and implement grain cleaning schedule, the mechanical removal of vegetation, introduction of specialized equipment for vegetation control. And I put that in now because I think what we are doing here is we are using the same type of equipment every year, and we're not looking at other type of equipment that we can use to control vegetation. So we need to look at other specialized equipment that can come in and maintain the vegetation growth. And also, right there, got continued introduction of new herbicide. One of the things that we've been thrown around is a growth regulator to try to control the growth of some of these woody plants that look like getting out of hand. And one of them is the arrowweed. If we can control the growth on that, maybe we can be able to come back and remove it later on. Continuation of the Tamarisk program and implementation of employee training. And that implementation, I think sometime in the second quarter of next year, maybe I can probably get some type of program going for the employees. But Doing the GPS system, they will have to be trained and know what the proper way of removing vegetation and sediment from the drains and canals.
That's mostly in the drainage.
Mostly in the drains, very seldom probably in the canal, especially the main canal. You might want to, because of the sediment in the bottom, you really don't want to take out too much because of the clay lining. So we have to really be careful when we go into some of these big main canals and some of these areas where you have seepage problem. You want to be very careful how much you move out the side.
Mr. Watson, if you're going to use a growth regulator, you're going to bring back the mowers to get ahead of it so you can apply it?
That's one of the things where I was talking about introducing a specialized equipment. Maybe bring something in there that can get in ahead of it, and we can come back with a growth regulator and spray it. And then by the time they get back a certain height, this machine or what type of equipment it is will be in there to take care of it. But we need to get some time as we move out through the valley, because so big of a valley that you're trying to get around and cover with chemical, and you have all kinds of variables out there that keep you from spraying. So it'd be nice to have some type of specialized equipment in front of you.
We are actually in the process of testing out some of the different mowers that are currently available. We did some tests last week, and they didn't work out as well as we'd hoped, so they're going to be doing some other tests. They'll be going up to Escondido, I think, to look at some new equipment that might not have the same kind of problems that we've had with the mowers in the past.
You can come to my shop and see the one I got.
Maybe you can rent them to us, yes.
That,
I've got a question for David. Mr. Watson, on the aquatic vegetation, you say there's a lot of restrictions on that. Do we have proper license and so forth for spraying aquatic vegetation?
Yes, I have the proper license for aquatic use, and also the spray contract to have the license on that.
Do you have the right material to spray with?
I have the right material. Only thing is that it have a restriction on there for irrigation purposes. So for its grain concern is I can do it, spray inside the grain, but for irrigation, we very limited what we can do inside the canals.
Okay. What about it at, for example, up at the marshland? How do we control that? I mean, I'm sure there's all types of aquatic weeds up that way you got to control.
Yeah, that's I guess a special condition, and I don't know who's in charge. Okay.
I can try to address that again. First, some of the things that the rest of you folks think are weeds, we like up at the managed marsh, so we're not all, some of that stuff we don't want to kill. We've got a permit from the county, and we've got licensed people that do some spraying up at the managed marsh. And I think at the end of next month, we plan to have the Conservation Corps back for a week to actually do hand removal. The only thing we concentrate on up there is tamarisk. The rest of the stuff has some level of habitat value, so we leave it there. And in the past, David has been kind enough to clean the P lateral for us, which supplies water to the marsh, remove the tamarisk from that, so we had less of a seed bank from that.
On the spray equipment for the tamarisk, salt and cedars, we had a presentation here a couple of years ago on a spray rig that would just isolate onto the salt and cedar. Did we ever buy that, or is that, do we use that piece of equipment, or does anyone else remember that piece of equipment? It was on a boom.
We have a couple slides here of some of the equipment we are using. Why don't you show them that?
I'm not too sure. I don't think I was here during that presentation. But with the salt cedars, if you don't get a good enough coverage on the salt cedar, then you might have a good result, effective result. But most likely in all cases, back in the spring when things begin to flourish, you might still see some type of growth going from that, unless you actually get a good coverage on it.
The look of the battle that's ahead of you when it comes time for budget purposes, you better be jumping up on the table and screaming, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
Now this is some equipment. myself, Vince, and we got with the spray contract, and we sit down and we wanted to come up with some type of device that will limit the impact of the irrigation portion of it. And one of these is what they call the wicking arm right there. Is a canister where the chemical is injected into it, and you have nylon rope they use. You can use other type of wickings there, but nylon rope, it gets saturated with the chemical. You go across, you rub it against the plant. Enough chemical goes into the plant, then you might see some effective results. So what we are proposing to do, if we can get some, Steve Charlton working trying to get some balls so we can do some testing of the water. So if we can get there tomorrow, we're going to go do some pilot tests out there on the West Side Main, and we're going to use this device on the West Side Main, and we're going to take it off into different sections. One section you do one pass, the next section we do pass down and pass up, and then maybe the third section we get 3 passes. It depends on the rate that we use, and it doesn't exceed the maximum rate required by the label. So that's going to be something that we're going to log in data and see how long it takes to be effective on that. This is a shield that they had attached to the boom there, and what it does, it goes up. If I can do that, it goes up, then it drops down. It's about 6 to 8 feet high, and they have the nozzle on top and on the side. Oh, you can see it right there. So you get a full coverage on there. And what they did is they made a little lip right here to catch any kind of chemical that come off of this side right here and catch it. And what they plan on doing is putting a basin down here to bring that chemical back up and back into the tank. So we won't have any chemical going into the water, and I think that's be something that we can probably use and get approval from the manufacturer. Maybe we can get a special permit to use it on the canals, different type of chemical. So we are in the fact doing something on that. And that's all I have. Any other questions?
And then I have a question. Mr. Watson, are you using that thumb to remove brush and trees growing on the canals? I know that when I rode out there some time back with Mr. Kalin, he was talking, we bought some piece of equipment that had a thumb that you would attach it and they would pull the vegetation from the side. Are you using that?
We have something a little bit different than the thumb. We have what you call a rake, and I wish I took a picture of it, but it grab hold to the base just like the thumb would, the base of the salt cedar, and you would actually put it up and put up the root system up out of the embankment and try to take as less material we possibly can.
So it works better than the other gadget?
At this point, I can't say that it does.
So
I know it goes lots faster.
Was there a place for both of them, or just you rather go with this one with the rake? I don't know. I'm asking you.
What I was looking at is the amount of salt cedar we have out to control, and the idea was to get out there and get as much as we possibly can out of the ditch because we was getting quite a bit of complaints. And my suggestion was the time to go ahead with the rake and pull all those things out and get it on out the way and go. If we do have something that we can use the thumb, we can do a comparison on there and see which one worked the best on there.
No,
I'm pretty sure it worked pretty good.
Well, I just want to use the one that's most effective. And, okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Watson?
Yeah. What is the budget for 2010 for your spraying for your vegetation control? Do you know what it is yet?
Actually, I put in a proposal and it going to I was asking for around about $2 million to be out there
for 2010.
Right, year round.
Okay.
2010 is already in place.
2011.
2011.
Right.
It's $2 million for 2011.
Well, 2011. I mean, that's what we're working on right now.
Right,
So we
working
haven't
on it
got
right
that number yet.
Okay. So
Any
you're asking
questions
for
from-
2 mil for 2011, correct? No, for 2010, for this year?
2011.
No.
For 2011.
2011. This year's already, budget's
Yeah, so
already
you're
budgeted.
asking 2 million for 2011?
Yes.
Okay. I'll remember that when we look at the budget.
This question for Mr. Watson or Mr. Ross. I know I talked about before getting ag involved, since it is very sparse out there. And I know Mrs. Dale's in the back, and I know you said you were going to give it to Al Cannon, but I think if you really want to blanket the area, it could be helpful here.
Well, I mean, I think to the credit of the WCAB, a lot of what you're seeing here is a result of the work that's been going on with them for the last year or two. I think Mr. Kalin did send out an agenda for September's meeting that includes an update, which will probably be pretty much what you've seen today, maybe with a little more detail. But, you know, we certainly agree that the farmers are the ones that would probably have some technical expertise to lend to us here, and we're all ears.
One thing, especially the laterals, because our canals, or I mean, our irrigation canals are similarly situated to your laterals. Maybe not so much with the drain that could help, but definitely with the laterals.
Yes, no, I'd agree.
Question?
I got it. Dave, I have a question. On the contract that you have on the spray contract with the 5-year contract, you've made some adjustments to the contract for the remaining time that you have on it.
We have not made any adjustment at this time.
Are you in the process of looking at making some adjustments before the contract's up?
Probably for 2011, we are looking at making some adjustments on the contract. But for this year, I don't
No,
think so.
but for, what do you have, one more year left on the contract?
One more year,
That's
the end of 2011.
And for that year, so you've finished basically 4 years at the end of 2010, and you've got one more to go.
That's correct.
And on that 1 year left, you're going to make some changes possibly on the contract that are more favorable towards the district on getting the weeds under control.
Exactly.
Okay.
Orby? Oh, Lindsay's already standing up.
Lindsay Dale, Imperial County Farm Bureau. First of all, thank you for having this agenda item. This is a very important item to the Farm Bureau. In regards to the TMDL, we have in the past met with your staff and our TMDL Advisory Committee and Regional Board as a joint effort. We met periodically, and I think that I don't know how long ago this was, we kind of started talking about this, and this is as a result of these meetings, this vegetation management plan. I'd like to see those meetings resume. I think we got a lot going. I think we met a lot of kind of ideas were brought out. As Mr. Abadi mentioned, we are very, we have a lot of expertise on our board. We are available for questions at any time, but this is the only way, if we get this vegetation management plan and the drain maintenance plan going and your employees properly educated on the TMDL issues, it's the only way we are going to meet our TMDL goals. I mean, currently our farmers are doing everything that they can, and we've met our goals, but we're kind of at a plateau right now. And without the IID's efforts, we're never going to meet those goals. So this is how important it is. I know Regional Board has been here talking to you. They feel the same way. So I hope that you will continue on and approve the budget that's needed and use the expertise of the farmers, because we can definitely offer quite a bit.
Orby?
Orby Hanks, Brawley, California. I was just going to ask Mr. Watson, speaking of the canals and the drain ditches and whatever, and the removal of the vegetation, do you also work with the excavators, the overgrown backhoes that remove the vegetation out of the bottom of the drain ditches? Some of us have a problem whenever we're moving equipment. Some of the older ditches have a double bank system where the old dredges used to just come down and scoop the stuff out, and then the water eroded that bottom out, and then there was an area down there that the Bermuda grass took over, and water flowed, and in some drain ditches you could almost see clear water flowing because there was no erosion. And then we've noticed lately that some of the excavators, I guess is what you call them, have come in and removed those small banks, even though they were above the water flow. And those of us who send 15, 16 tons of metal down the side of a drain ditch and moving from field to field occasionally have a landslide. And I was wondering if there's anybody has checking on those bills to where that, for lack of a better term, infrastructure from the grassroots and whatever at the bottom of the canal has been removed. Is anybody going back and checking those canals, or drain ditches especially?
So the question is, or the concern is, the canals are...
Well, it's drain ditches especially are caving in, and they're just shearing off the side. And I don't know whether anybody's looked at it or not, but I had forgotten about it until we were talking about the pulling up the tamaracks, which are pull them up today and they're gone tomorrow and back next week. But it's a continuous battle. But this is becoming a problem in some areas, especially in the deeper drains. Just for what it's worth.
We would definitely take a look at this. I know that we've been having problem with grain stuff in not only in the northern end, but just about in the south end and just about everywhere you go. So I am working on that, see the problem of why the grains are sloughing in on that. And so we are trying to address that problem.
Al Kalin, Westmoreland. I've got a couple of comments. I've worked with David for 2 years. I rallied to have somebody hire him, and the district did, and that's great. David, I think, is very capable of handling the vegetation projects on the district drains and canals. However, he doesn't have any money to do it with, nor has he since he was hired, and that's a real problem. And I hope that the board will see fit to give him enough money to work with in the future. I was a little bit confused by one of his first slides. Talked about funding was removed in 2008. Can you explain that, David? Or maybe I misunderstood.
No, what happened was, Al, is that I put in a proposal in to have the spray contract increase to a certain amount, and at the time they didn't have any funding to fund that, and so it was removed from the budget.
Okay. We talked about, or David talked about the current cleanup in the Calipat area, and indeed it does look very pretty where they've done the work. I would hope that they already have a plan in place to control the new weeds that grow in that area. Otherwise, in 2 years, you'll be right back where you were before. The vegetation that they removed is not really removed. Arrowweeds being probably one of the prime problems in that area. They grow from deep underground roots, and I seriously doubt if they've removed enough dirt to remove those roots. So they will be sprouting soon, and you need to have a plan in place to attack those. Not wait until they get large when they're very difficult, but when they're young. Arrowweeds grow from a large colony of roots underneath the ground. They send shoots up, and so it's all one plant almost. So they're very difficult to control, and it takes multiple applications, and of course that takes a lot of money. And as you continue to do your cleanup, I hope you also understand that you're going to have to fund the spraying of those areas where you've cleaned just to stay even. One thing I didn't hear discussed, and I think has a lot of merit, is aerial application of herbicides. It's used all over the United States. A lot of the materials that David is currently using is registered for aerial application. It would speed up the spraying process. It would be much cheaper. They could do a lot more miles per year. There's specialty booms that and additives that stop drift. There's booms that just emit foam that coats the plant, and invert emulsions that look kind of like mayonnaise that further stop drift. So there's all kinds of things that can be used and have been used on places like the Rio Grande in Texas for removal of salt cedars. There's a lot of canals that we have, or drains, excuse me, not canals, but drains in the Imperial Irrigation District system that could be, the weeds could be controlled with the use of aerial application. I'm speaking primarily with a helicopter. I didn't hear anything in this plan about maintaining the beneficial plants. There's good plants and there's bad plants. The bad plants we call weeds. And the good plants, if they're grown in the wrong place, they can also be weeds. And arrowweed is an excellent example. It has a wonderful root system that holds the banks, but if it gets out of place or it grows too fast, then it plugs things up. And that's why David's talking about the materials that would stop the growth, growth regulants. The grant that you have from Regional Water Quality Control Board that's going to pay for the excavators also has a section in it to do research on native plants that would be beneficial to hold the banks. And I'm speaking of saltgrass. And I think this needs to be looked at very closely. Saltgrass is a very, very tough plant, but it is killed very easily by herbicides. Certain herbicides. Others don't seem to bother it. Unfortunately, we've been using herbicides that kill it. And so where you had a total coverage of saltgrass on a bank that forms a canopy and keeps seeds from germinating from underneath, you now have bare banks that are starting to slough. And so you need to figure out a way to get that grass reestablished rapidly instead of letting it establish itself. And that includes mechanical cleaning. The past way they clean ditches, it appears, they scrape the grass off the banks all the way up the side. And that's not productive. You need to just clean the areas that need to be cleaned and leave the grass when you can leave it. In the wicking that David showed, I was curious what material you were using.
Right now, we're going to use the Emancipator and Glyphosate. A combination.
And you're looking for funding to buy some to play with?
It's just a test pilot program, so it's not going to be as much use on that. So we do have some for the 2010 Timbers program, so we can use a little bit of that to do experimentation on this.
Okay, because I'd be glad to donate some if that's all it takes. I mean, we need as many test plots out there as possible, and I use the material every day in the properties that I manage and on my own ranch. And so, you know, I would be glad to help furnish some for a test plot if that was necessary. You know, bottom line is all these new ideas are going to cost money, and I certainly hope that they'll be funded.
Thank you, Al. I have a question for David. David, are we meeting our in your opinion, are we going to be able to meet our TMDL goals?
I think I'm going to let one of the manager answer that.
Yeah, let me take a shot at it anyway.
Okay.
You know, the TMDL program and the drain cleaning program are separate. Drain cleaning and canal cleaning are part of your best management practices. The amount of TMDLs or the cleaning that we have to meet is yet to be determined. I think what we're looking for in terms of submittal to the regional board has to do with the plan that David and Vince and John Curtis are working on, and showing that we've included all these best management practices in there. The ultimate effect, I think, may be on the Farm Bureau's ability to meet the TMDL program, because they're the ones that actually are being regulated or taken on regulations by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, because most of the silt is actually coming off the private property, and it's not in the drains. The amount of work that we do in a drain, when we got 3,000 miles of drains and we got 8 pieces of equipment, is really not creating the silt that is the main target of the regional board. But certainly Mr. Kalin can answer it a little more thoroughly. But I think it's important that we understand there are two separate things. There's the drain cleaning program. It certainly supports the TMDL program, but then there's the TMDL program that the farmers have some responsibility for, and they have their own management practices that deal with that part of it.
I'd have to beg to differ with Mr. Ross. The cleaning of the drains creates silt. I'm speaking from my experience as the TMDL on-farm advisor for the Farm Bureau's program in helping monitor the drains, the minor drains that the district has to monitor on a quarterly basis. I was curious where the silt was coming from. If a farmer in our program is creating silt, then I need to know about it so I can go counsel him on how to stop that problem. And so when I have gone out and watched them monitor water, when I find a extremely muddy drain, then I follow it upstream to find out what's causing it. In the Calipat area where they're now redoing the canals, I found that most of that area grows because of the type of soil, Bermuda grass. The drain water coming off those fields is crystal clear. However, when it gets in the drain and starts its journey towards the Alamo River, it increases velocity because of very steep ground in that area. And that's what picks up silt, is the velocity. The faster it goes, the more silt it picks up. And what we found was that when more than 2 or 3 farmers were farming or irrigating at the same time in fields on a canal that drained to the same drain, it increased the volume of water in that drain, and the levels in the drain rose to the point where they were not in their natural banks or boundaries, and that's where all the silt came from. If it had stayed lower, there wouldn't have been a problem. But when you have an increase in flow, then your water's moving in areas where it usually doesn't, and that's where you have the erosion.
Thank you. Any questions from the board or from the public? David, thank you. Any more water
15.
general matters? Are we on to 15 or are we still on 14?
To 15,
15.
Mr. President. Tina Shields has this report.
Good afternoon, Tina Shields with the Water Department. I just wanted to provide you an update of the regional planning process. Thank you. For somebody else. Of the regional planning process that's underway. As you recall, back in April of 2009, the IID submitted what was known as a RAP application to Department of Water Resources to define boundaries for an integrated regional plan that met the state standards. In the fall of last year, that region was approved, and we worked for quite some time to initiate a kickoff effort in conjunction with Imperial County. So we did finally get that started this year. You all approved a contract amendment with GEI last year to move that effort forward. To date, we've held 3 Water Forum meetings, and the Water Forum is the large group of stakeholders and interested parties who are going to be key to the development of this plan. Since that time, we have also formed 2 work groups. One is focused on the charter, which is sort of the governance and process issues, and the second is focused on the goals and objectives of the regional plan and what its intent is and where we're going to be going to help steer the boat a little bit. So that process is ongoing. I was hoping Andy Horn would be here, but I don't think he's made it quite yet, just to offer the county's perspective on this. But we are moving forward. It's a bit of a slow process when you have a large group of people involved, and so we're still sorting out some of the process issues right now, which was really the primary objective of the phase one. We anticipate our next meeting will be Thursday, September 9th at the SDG&E Renewable Energy Conference Center on Main Street from 9 to 11. So we will be moving forward with that process. We've started sketching out the project identification, which is a little bit ahead of the schedule. We have a lot of the framework for the water supply issues from the IID draft plan, but what we need to do now is roll in primarily the municipal issues, but also some other related issues as they pertain to water treatment, wastewater, recycling, stormwater, and some environmental issues. So we have approached the city managers and the city planners and asked them to assist us in the identification of those projects that they see for their agencies, as well as a few of the regional projects such as the Mesquite Lake, or maybe it's Keystone project this year, and to ensure that that is incorporated into the planning technical memorandums as well. So that's just my real quick summary on where we're going. We're hoping by the end of this year to have phase one completed, and that will help further define where we're going next year. I will also be back at your first board meeting in September to bring you a resolution asking you to adopt, which is in order for us to initiate a planning grant request for the Department of Water Resources. They offer up to $1 million for each regional plan process, so we will be applying for the full $1 million. It's a 25% matching for disadvantaged communities, which is what our area falls under. And we feel pretty confident with all the funds we've already expended on the draft plan and building the water supply analysis and framework that will be credited towards our matching. So hopefully we'll get some monies back to help offset some of the cost of the existing plan, as well as to fund additional efforts that are identified through the water forum process. If there's any questions?
Make sure that that meeting is not held in La Quinta, but here, because I think we're going to meet in La Quinta, the first meeting in September.
I believe that's right.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll probably be
we'll
bringing
have
it back at your information meeting on the 14th for approval in order to meet the deadline. It's very similar to the regional board resolution you approved a couple weeks ago that basically just authorizes myself to enter into a grant agreement with the state, providing their terms are all acceptable. So we just need sort of an enabling authorization to submit with our application.
Okay. Good.
Questions?
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Tina, are any questions from the public for Tina?
Okay.
All right, moving forward to
Energy Department General Manager.
I
General
just
Matters.
I just have one item. It does look like today that we will set an all-time peak for
You're kidding. Over
Energy.
1,000?
over 1,000. Looks like we're heading somewhere between 1,010 to 1,020. We won't know till a little later on. I think the peak is probably going to be around 4:30. Tomorrow may even be more. It depends on what's out there, but pretty much everything is coming online today.
Is the nylon peaker plant, is it working?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you.
Is it working 100% capacity?
I'm sure it's meeting my expectations. I'm not sure about yours.
Mr. A, I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
We have actually we're buying power on the off the grid right now. We're not having don't seem to be having a problem meeting our peak load. And in fact, our day trading group is buying power for somewhere in the $50 to $55 range, which is extremely reasonable compared to what we would have paid with Shell. I'll get you a more complete report for the next meeting on details of.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Zane, isn't this anticipated? I mean, if you look at the norm from the last few years, because this is when, I mean, it seems like we're earlier, school's starting earlier, but school does come online right here toward the end of the month. So I would think that's probably has a lot to do with the reason for it's bumping up so fast.
Yeah, but I think we were anticipating today that we would approach a peak. We were looking at about 990, 980, somewhere in that range, but it actually has exceeded what we thought.
What was the peak last year?
Last year was what, 950?
980. 960 something.
960. I think, yeah, 960.
So it's global warming then, isn't it?
That must be it. It's
That must be it.
Imperial Valley warming is what it is.
Okay.
I believe the hottest day on Earth, on Death Valley, was in 1903. I was reading that book. That was before the Industrial Revolution. So, is it man-made or is it the natural Earth?
It's global warming. It just started back then.
All right.
Takes a long time. We're on to Western Farms land leasing strategy. And Paul Peschel and Tommy Mills.
Let me get rid of that. Basically, this is, well, is the, if I can get this, is the first slide here says it's a presentation about Western farmlands and dealing with the leasing opportunities that we envision. On this first slide, it goes over issues and opportunities. Basically, the intent of the leasing strategy is to maximize lease and water revenues and then water sales. Some particulars on this slide that I think are important to note. We have 2,621 acres of land that's available for lease that are not being leased. And if you look at a value of about $50 to $100 an acre, there's potentially $260,000 of additional lease revenue that we aren't realizing at this time. And at an average of $5 an acre foot per acre, that has the potential to bring an additional $262,000. And basically those opportunities set the stage for a strategy, which there's 3 key items. One, to basically try to lease as much as possible at 2,621 acres. The idea would be to use an agricultural land lease committee. We'd want it to have oversight over the leasing process, have the ability to be creative in protecting the interests of both the IID and the growers, and be able to facilitate the process in general and also with regard to non-ag users and uses. To facilitate that process further, the intent would be to modify some lease language, which we'd come back to the board later. I did provide a handout, and there's some on the table over there. It summarizes the changes. The top of that handout shows a proposed language, the bottom the original language. Basically, there's a modification to the 60-day termination. It makes it more flexible. And then in general, the idea would be to be flexible, allow harvesting to finish for any type of crop really when at all possible, and negotiate exceptions and things like that. And then there's also a small modification to the stand costs. And if we can carry out this plan, basically we'd want to accomplish some goals which are listed here, and I'll summarize a few of them. One would be to maintain the saleability and protect not only the growers' investments but the IID's investments, and then create opportunities for non-agricultural endeavors while protecting the growers' interests. Also, we'd want to make sure in terms of protecting the IID, again, the revenues were mentioned with regard to water sales, lease sales, and then also some protection of water rights. You'd have a little higher water use, and it provides some ability to help the environment also. And as part of the committee on tracking and reporting, the current data that we have is listed. Basically, I've gone over that on the other slides. Basically, the idea would be to come back to the board as required through the committee, and through that be able to show increasing revenues and how we're better leveraging those lands. And basically, that is it. If you have any questions.
I just have a question. Doesn't a committee slow things down? When you have to go to a committee, isn't that?
It potentially can, but again, the idea behind the committee, it serves two purposes. One, with the lease committee, one activity is to make sure that we protect the perception that there's favoritism, because Tommy is going to be the key person who's managing the land activities. When we look at some of the lands that are less favorable for just general leasing, the committee, one of the responsibilities of the committee would be to look at that and say, all right, are there opportunities to negotiate a less than standard or a different than standard lease so that we can allow a farmer to, or grower to take a field that's been out of production for a period of time and make an investment in that, and yet how do we protect their investment? Well, rather than having one person trying to negotiate what's a reasonable lease arrangement that will allow potentially a lower lease than normal, it serves as a protection for both Tommy and for the potential grower, that having more people look at it just provides a better protection. And by including the finance department, then we're going to make sure that we get the best value for the lease as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Campbell, I'm in agreement with you on that. Particularly some of this land that hasn't been farmed in 4 or 5 years. There's going to be quite a bit of expenditure getting that land back in shape, getting weeds and some of the cement ditches that have buckled and so forth. So I'd like to commend Dr. Brady on moving this forward. And I think it's going to need that flexibility of that committee on some of this less than optimal land to be able to put that land back in shape. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. Tommy, can I ask you a question, please? The 2,621 acres, is that the stuff that Director Hanks is talking about, is up there on Sinclair that hasn't been farmed in a long, long time?
Some of it's been a long, long time. Some of it just hadn't been farmed for 4 or 5 years. There was 2 other areas we were looking at for the managed marsh that after they, terminated the leases, they didn't renew them until we actually picked a spot for the marsh. But some of them haven't been farmed in 10 or 11 or plus years before we bought it.
Right, and I know I've been up there, and I know the ditches. I mean, some of that's not even farmable in a sense. And has some of the guys expressed an interest up there if they just took the ground over and started farming it?
Yeah, if we get the lease deal right, I think we can get the dust and weed mitigation problem there and sell some water. We might farm alongside or parallel to a cement ditch. May cost too much to repair the ditch. Maybe just put in a dirt ditch. That's part of the incentive that the committee is going to be able to approve, to get the guys to invest money to bring those back into production.
But mainly the 2,621 that's available for lease, that's the only ground that's not being farmed, according to what the PowerPoint here shows?
Pretty much so.
Okay, and that's all that stuff up around the managed marsh and that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Will there be, go ahead.
I just have a question. Will you also be working with the solar developers that are looking to lease land for their projects? That's
Yes,
going to
ma'am.
come under your committee as well?
Yes, ma'am. And that's one of the reasons we want to establish a committee so that we can make the transition between the farm lease and a geothermal lease blend a little better, rather than just, evict the farm tenant and then put a geothermal lease in place when actually maybe they only need about 3 or 4% of the actual footprint for the geothermal activity. We can maintain our ag and our water use on that property also.
Okay.
And the other part, as Tommy's identified in our conversations, while there may be an intent to move forward, even if the land is sold or leased to somebody, it takes 18 months before there's a shovel in the ground for development, and it's just 18 months that we're creating dust, and we're not selling water. So it's how do we continue to leverage that land?
Yeah.
One of the, I think one of the issues I'd like to see considered, familiar with some of that ground with sandy and rocky and so forth and uneven. And if there's individuals that are interested in bringing in modified irrigation techniques, pivots and so forth, is there any plans maybe give them some considerations for some of that ground? Or
All that will be considered, I'm sure. That's one of the other reasons for the committee, so that you can have several minds looking at it and discussing it, and we'll be back in front of you with some of those proposals.
I would think if it was if it was going to be used for a pilot or something along that line, it would be great.
Absolutely.
The farmers had some of the trust lands that wanted to extend the leases back in June or July. I know that there were some issues there. That all got taken care of.
Those three in particular were diffused.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And they're satisfied with the way it worked out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, does that include Mr. Weiss?
That's right.
Not yet, but his
Not yet.
lease doesn't expire until October 31st, and with this adjustment, we'll be able to appease him also, I'm hoping.
We'll be able to accommodate him.
Okay.
We don't appease anybody.
Well, there you go. You'll be one of the first to know, I'm sure, Mr. Hanks.
And if I might just, as you know, the general manager signs off on these leases anyway. So we're not expecting to come back and say, hey, what do you think about this? We'll bring back updates to you because we're going to get creative. We want to get those things leased. I mean, if there's anything risky or we perceive as risky or anything, we'll be coming back to you, but not necessarily on individual leases.
Yeah, move it, get it moving, move it forward, and get some crops on it.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
I think
Al, do you have a question?
Al Kalin, Westmoreland. One of the things I might mention is out of the 1,200 acres that's set aside for the managed marsh, 400 has been developed. Another 400 will be developed in 2014.
2009 and then 2014.
And then there's another 400 after that. It would seem to me that it would be beneficial to try to lease that ground out, if for no other reason than to try to preserve the ditches that are on there in case you need to use those ditches in the new managed marsh, and to also eradicate the weeds that are growing on that property. The tile systems on that property also can be ruined if they set very long. Mr. Osias made a comment that it's very hard for land to be productive if it only receives water every 3 years. Well, that's what's happened here, and the ditches have deteriorated, the tile lines have deteriorated, and the weeds have grown. And the WCAB and the Farm Bureau both commented on this right from the start, that they needed to be, the ditches need to be filled with water once a year. The tile lines need to be filled with water once a year on your land that was fallow or just sitting there to preserve those systems. And that hasn't been done, and so the ground has deteriorated. So, you know, the rocky ground that Mr. Hanks talks about, you know, it's one big block. And obviously, I don't know, there's citrus growing on either side of it. I don't know what the future holds for citrus with all the critters that are invading the county, but I think it's possibly valuable as citrus ground if they can stop those pests that they're encountering right now. Thank you.
You know, Dr. Brady, Mr. Caden brings on some interesting points. I like that, you know, as far as using this unused entitlement, at least to maintain the integrity of the ditches and the tile system and the land. Seems to me as a beneficiary, it always has been before.
Well, we'll take a look at that. That's a good point.
And then also what he brought up about, you know, that if Mr. Wilcox doesn't need 400 or the other 800 that's left out there, is maybe get a one-year lease and some of the other stuff. I'm not sure what your layout and the overall plan is on the build-out of that managed marsh, but we can use all the revenues we can get.
Absolutely. We will take a look at that.
Orby Hanks, Brawley, California. That area that we're talking about up in the north end is very familiar to me. I had the privilege of running a combine up there on old International 123. And I think it was probably about 15 bushel flax, which was just barely enough to pay the water bill. Now, some of that ground, this last 2 years, we went up there, and whenever wheat was $20 a hundred, we thrashed some 4-ton wheat. And that's not too shabby on optimal ground. The difference between optimal ground and productive ground is the way it is farmed. Some of those guys owned that land so long they couldn't afford diesel to drag a disc across it, so they just did the best they could and planted it. That ground is capable of production. But I don't know now what it will be like after the ditches, the tile lines, the fields have salt and cedars you can hide a pickup behind. The ground has really been neglected, and you've mentioned that you're going to be creative and work something out with the growers. If you're looking at optimum growth up there, you're going to be looking at 4-year crops or longer, like Bermuda grass, alfalfa, and if you're going to go 1 year or whatever, probably wheat. But you really need to be creative to give these guys an opportunity to come in. Now, just on that 5 years, and I'm going to do this, you want to do something different? Here's something different, as Mr. Garber has said. I'm not an attorney. I know what they call attorneys in the hillbilly language. I know what they call attorneys in England. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether they're barristers or banisters. But I also know what the first century lawyers were called. And so I'll try to do a little bit of educating from what us rock farmers know. That land has been, if it were laid followed for 5 years, one example, 262 acres by 5 acre feet times 5 acre feet is 13,105 acre feet of water. Multiply that by 5 years, you have 65,525 acre feet of water. At $20 an acre foot, that's $1,310,500. And a fair price would say you could rent that at $75 times 2,621 equals $196,575. Multiply that by 5 years, you have $982,875. Add that up, and you've got $2.3 million down the drain because it was sitting there, and that was just as if it was being optimally farmed. Had that land been leased and our land been followed and whatever, it would have produced approximately $22 million at $350 an acre foot. Now that's a lot of money. It was there. We're talking about land. Now, we're looking at this same land. In the last 2 years, we've had over 400,000 acre feet of water go to the land, to MWD for free. You multiply that out, if it were at $400 an acre, as the paper said, that was what water's supposed to be worth, and I'll have to take their word for it. I haven't kept up with it. If that were put on into houses, 5 houses per acre at $2,000 per house a year, and then you multiply that out, it's $10,000 a year per acre, 400,000 acre feet. Per acre feet, $10,000 would what be the retail. That would bring you back $8 billion.
A lot of beans.
A lot of money. And that is set there, and we're letting that go. I think it is time that this is a long overdue deal to take a look at what is happening here in the Imperial County, in the IID district. Many people say you're down on the company, you're down on the IID. Why are you always pounding on them and being negative? I'm not being negative. I like to think of myself as an educator and as a winner. And whenever we get things going and we have all of these deals coming back to us and makes us look like that we're dummies. San Diego, LA, and whatever, whenever they sell that water on a retail basis, that same amount of water, San Diego sold that for $550 million worth of water that San Diego could have had. That's a lot of money. And whenever we talk about optimal land, that optimal land produces what? Bermuda grass, alfalfa, maybe Sudan grass, and a few of those things, and wheat. Alfalfa, Bermuda are a 5 to 6 year crop. So you can't afford to lease it just for 1 year. You got to give the guys a chance, and I hear that. That sounds good. But you say, well, those are the things that we have targeted, and they're not important crops. We need food and fiber. That's urban mentality. That is not reality. What do cows eat? Hay. Alfalfa, Bermuda grass. What do cows produce? Beef, milk, butter, cheese. The very necessities of life. What do grains
You forgot
produce?
ice cream.
Huh?
You forgot ice cream.
I tried not to think of that. That is one of the products, Sarah, that we're saying that we don't need anymore. Wheat produces the bread of life. The bare necessity. Bread, noodles, or whatever, tortillas, that is where you get it, is from wheat. So people, and then where else does grain go? If those guys back in Iowa had been feeding Imperial Valley grain, they wouldn't be worried about salmonella now in their egg factory. There is your egg production. Now, whenever we're looking at this ground, let's look at it as something else just besides, what was the term? Substandard or whatever farmland. That is not only substandard, it may be substandard farmland in your opinion, but I've been criticized because Roland R. picked up in the early days quite a chunk of money because that land laid fallow. And that land could have been going for some other production. But if we're going to sell that land, let's not sell it for farmland for $750 an acre or $1,200 an acre, because that land is sitting on top of the hottest geothermal, whatever you call it, ground in probably in the United States, maybe in the world. And if we're going to sell it, then have your real estate people look at it for what it's worth. But if we're going to sell it there, and then whatever, I guess maybe we can lease it to them and sell the water to them at $500 an acre and come out on it. But I just had to give you that example of what we're talking about. When we come to look at where we sit down here in the valley, we get a bum steer. We're considered ignorant, backward, and whatever. And whenever the attorneys get through with us and the big city people get through with us, it looks that way. But you know, there is a cure for ignorance. And I found that after 27 years in education. And the IID has been accused If I were, I'd get in trouble if I were trying to practice law without a license. I may get in trouble for trying to practice medicine without a license. But there is a cure for ignorance, and that is knowledge. And whenever we start sharing what our knowledge is and we know what we've got, then maybe we would come out of this thing and smelling like a rose instead of the other end.
Do you have any other questions for the leasing strategy? Do you have any other questions for the leasing strategy?
Releasing strategy?
Leasing strategy.
Well, I don't know what your strategy is, but what you've got, it is a good beginning.
Thank you.
And whenever you get it, I get a chance to look at it. I may come back. Otherwise, I'll keep my mouth shut. But I just had to say that because this guy's up in the north end. We're proud of our part of the valley. Thank you.
And we do allow that for public comments, Orby. Moving forward to update discussion on energy cost adjustment.
Yes. Mr. Broking. This is informational only.
Yeah, this is for information only. As Director Sanchez, this is an update from my last presentation. Give you a little background on what our current 5-year forecast looks like. It's a forecast that we shared with the rating agencies. It has no change to our current rate structure, no increase in rates from 2010 through 2012. There is a forecasted rate increase to 5 and 6% in 2013 and 2014, and we plan on using the money we've set aside in rate stabilization fund during the years 2012 through 2014. The strategic goal is to maintain long-term stable and predictable rates. As part of that, what we're trying to do is maintain 2 times debt service coverage and maintain $100 million of working capital or liquidity.
Greg, what does that mean between the difference between the 53.5 and the $100 million working capital? I know what the difference is, but is the 53.5 part of the $100 million working capital?
No, it's not.
There's $150 million that we have, 100 for new projects and 53 for
rate stabilization. Yeah, I think it's a little more than 100 million working capital right now, but the goal is to maintain at least 100 million. I think we're a little above that.
Now, do you, in the future, when we go and borrow money for projects, wouldn't that eat into our $53.5 million of rate stabilization fund if we don't raise rates?
It does put upward pressure on rates when you do borrow money, yes. And part of what we will need that rate stabilization fund is to pay for increased cost during those 3 years.
So, in other words, the 53.5 is not necessarily for spikes in future energy purchase power type of costs, but
it can be used for any legitimate district purpose or expense.
It was set aside to keep us from having to increase the rates to the ratepayer.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's the reason we put it aside.
And these are our forecasted rates based on what we've currently developed. It's 13.36 cents in 2010 is pretty, as I mentioned, there's no planned forecasted rate increase for the next 3 years, so those rates are pretty consistent. You see in 2013 and 14 there are increases because of the planned or forecasted 5 and 6% rate increase. The slide shows available cash for capital projects. At the top would indicate that we plan on borrowing $250 million for the El Centro project, and I think everyone knows that's on hold. And our forecast also includes borrowing $80 million for distribution projects over the next few years. So with that as a background, what we project in total cash that would be available for capital, excluding what we're going to finance, is $321 million, and our expenditures over that time are slightly above that, of $339 million.
Ed, On the $80 million on distribution projects, does that doesn't include the distribution as far as it's internal distribution, right? I mean, meaning it's not like the companies who are looking to export.
That doesn't include any external our transmission that's part of our transmission expansion plan. Those funds would be paid for as through our transmission expansion, where we're going to be asking the developers to put up that money. This does not include any of that.
So are we not asking for future? Is this for maintenance, $80 million, or is it for
just a
future growth
composite
that
of
we're not
our
going to
entire,
ask?
of all of our transmission and distribution needs. These will be local, internal projects, replacement projects. It's just something we have to do to keep the system, up to date. Does not include any. Doesn't include El Centro 3 or any of that. I believe. No significant generation projects are included in this as well.
Other than the $250 million for El Centro 3.
Oh, you've got the 250 in there. Okay, sorry, that's included.
I have a question on, Greg, I have a question on that slide.
Yeah.
The 321 million, you would have to borrow the 250 plus the 80 to get to that number. Is that what you're talking about?
Right, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
That-
then
that's
you would still have your 100 million operating capital plus the 53 million for rate stabilization would still be in the bank, right?
The 53 million would be gone by 2014, but we would have 100 million in working
Okay.
capital.
So your slide before that, then, when the rates go to 14.83 cents a kilowatt, that helps burn up the 53 million?
In the 10, 11, 12, right?
12,
and 13.
12, 13, and 14 time frame. Yes, it helps mitigate the need to make that 5 and 6% greater, the 53.5.
Okay.
That again, Ed, on that 80 million, that probably more likely include salary rate increases and costs of business going up, such as goods.
Well, these are capital items. Wouldn't include labor increase, except to the extent that they're capitalized.
I'll talk a little about the residential customer rate and the ECA. ECA is not historically operated as a pass-through of power supply expense. The existing base rate has been in place, I believe, since 1994. And the existing residential rate schedule is highlighted there. There's a $3.60 per charge per month for a customer charge. The base rate is $7.84. The ECA is 5.01. Total is 12.85 cents. And that compares to the average system in 2010 of 13.36. So the residential rate is just slightly below what the average rate is that we receive from our customers. So residential rate comparison for the district compared to other Southern California utilities, including the two large investor-owned utilities at 1,000 kWh and 2,000 kWh, shows that IID is the lowest provider at those levels. And when you compare to the investor-owned utilities at those levels, we're about half of what an Edison customer would pay or an SDG&E customer would pay. Trying to break out the new ECA based on the last 12 months period, and I say last 12 months, that would be June 30th, 2010. We used the number, so it's not an audited year, it's not our fiscal year, but it's the last 12 months. The top half of the slide is just a reiteration of what I spoke earlier of how the 1285 is currently broke out. If you calculated ECA factor based on total power supply costs less some wholesale sales, you would get 669, and you get the base rate just subtracting the 1285 from the 669, and that's 616. And a similar type calculation would need to be required for all rate classes if there were some changes made to the ECA. And this slide shows how the 669 was calculated. The net power supply cost over the 12-month period are $213 million. You divide that by the energy sales over that period, and that's how you get to 669. And for discussion purposes, what we have is a rate change effective January 1, where you would take the 12-month period that ends September 30th, the net power supply cost, and compare that to your base period, which is the period ending June 30th, 2010, and then depending on how that works, whether the period ending September 30th is higher or lower or no change, it would increase, decrease, or not change the ECA. It's just a function of what power supply costs do for the comparison period. And this is what our power supply costs are forecasted right now for the next 4 years, the net. So it's at 222 now, and it's forecasted to be as high as 297 by 2014. And obviously that's just a forecast. It could change, and it will change based on market forces. And this last slide shows a comparison
Greg,
of, yes.
What was 2009 power supply costs?
200?
How much?
I think it's 205 million.
Yeah, it was
205 net after wholesale sales.
So what was the increase if we had a slower year this year as far as both in price, natural gas, or same, and yeah, why was there a $15 million increase, or 22 minus 5?
Well, off the top of my head, I think there are a couple of things. One is that gas prices have been a little higher this year than they were last year. I've been guessing energy prices, any energy that's bought on the spot market has been a little higher too. And I think either San Juan or Palo Verde costs have gone up a little this year. They're not flat every year. The debt service changes from year to year. So I think the combination of those three things have probably caused it. We can do a more detailed analysis.
Yeah, because have we bought on the spot market, since we haven't even reached today's our first day as far as reaching our peak, but if we have 80% hedged and 20% on insurance contracts, how do we buy on the spot market?
It's my understanding that that's what the trading group has been doing. When there are market opportunities to buy, they do it, and I think they have been doing that.
We probably owe the board, I think, a briefing on that, a report bringing on day trading. We have enough experience, I think, to come in and tell you what's been going on. We've saved quite a bit of money with that group, and we are continuing to plan to expand that group and run that round the clock. As far as gas prices are concerned, actually they've been going up in the last year. Dave is here. They've gone up quite a bit in the last year. It's our current hedging policy that's allowed us to keep those numbers stable at 220 actually.
Well, this year's prices will affect next year or the following year.
They affect this year's, Mr. President. Gas prices, in a rough sense, have approximately doubled since last year. Now, our hedging process has locked it in the future markets, but we were purchasing in the $1.90 to $2.20 range for some months last year. This year, if we get under $4, we're lucky. Currently, the spot price is about $4.10 today, give or take. But we also have what we've locked in last year, and we have purchases for 2011, 2012, and are getting ready to make our first 2013 purchases. But in answer to slightly different, the best generator never runs. Okay, we do not want to run our own generation, ever, never. Okay, that is bad, except for reliability. We want our generation available and then be buying in the market less expensively. So when we're running, it means that bad things are happening. We're at the worst end of our extreme.
Not sure I'd go that far, Dave, but
but we really don't want to turn on our own
the
generation.
220 number two. I mean, just to give you some history, the 2008 was 285 million, and we were 2009 was 205 million, and we're estimating 220. But that's still a number we hope to beat. We still have some months left in the year, and we're working on that on a daily basis. So when the end of the year comes, I think you'll find us somewhat under that number.
Dr. Cook, I remember going through some presentations some time back, and my understanding that 2011 was actually we were able to buy at a cheaper rate than what we had stacked in 2010.
At the
We
beginning,
were on the
there was
$5 level in 2010. We were at the $6 level, and so I think these are physical purchases.
They're physical and hedge purchases. So when we look at our total cost of power, or the total costs that we paid in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012, our price of gas is going down over those time periods.
Well, that's why I'm wondering why you have 234 million here in 2011, which is quite a bit more than 2010 if we're cheaper. I mean, you expecting a large amount of growth or something, or?
We have some growth in there, and then you have increased costs for San Juan. And then a lot of our prices are just based upon what do we think is going to happen in the Cal ISO and spot market prices.
So this has capacity in here is what's a big driving factor for it to be higher than knowing the gas was purchased is cheaper? What's the driving factor that makes it higher than 2010? Knowing the gas portion is actually cheaper than 2010.
We're better off looking at it on a cents per kilowatt hour basis. I'd have to go back and look, but I would guess that it's load, transmission, and in San Juan.
We still have some more gas to buy for 2011. I mean, we're not
That's
fully.
correct.
We're not
No,
fully
2011, we're pretty much done. At 70%.
70%. We still have 30% to buy for 2011. So we're making some assumptions about what the price will be. We're fairly conservative with those assumptions to make sure that we don't come in too much above that. But the bottom line is gas prices are rising, and you will see a kind of a steady rise. Even though we buy 2-3 years out, we're not 100% hedged.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I've got a
on this?
I got a question for Greg. Greg, on page 6, slide, page 6. What are the charges or the elements that make up the ECA factor?
The ECA factor is all power supply costs, less any wholesale or natural gas sales.
Give me a list of them.
Oh, it's San Juan, Palo Verde, any capacity payments.
So that includes capacity charges in there?
Yeah, it includes all the power supply costs.
Okay, is Betty here? Internal auditors? Yeah, there she is. Betty, when we did the ECA audit, and we were calculating the over-under calculations for a number of years, went way back. Where was the capacity cost that you utilize?
You mean if capacity was part of the ECA?
Well,
that's your question.
And calculate was over and under. Did you place where did you place the capacity charges?
I believe so. Capacity, transmission, all that was part of the ECA calculation. I don't remember. I don't have the.
Would you check?
I will.
Later. Okay. All right.
I will.
Thank you.
Craig, on a follow-up question, right there, the 669.
Yes.
Is that what you're proposing for the next year, for the future?
I'm saying if you wanted to make the change in the near term, based on the last 12 months period, that would be the calculation of your total power supply, your net power supply cost is $669. That's what.
So what are you adding to the 669 from the 501?
I'm not adding anything to it. I'm recalculating I'm recalculating the ECA based on total power supply cost.
So right now, you're saying in the base rate, there's power supply costs in the base rate that's not in the ECA rate?
Yes, that's true. Yes. There's 669 less,
for example,
501. I mean, that's
What? 784 minus the 616.
What is that you removed from the base rate to the ECA?
So there's like 2/3 of a cent.
What do you mean? What did I move?
Well, because from base rate it went from 784 to 616. How come?
Because the ECA went from 501 to 669.
I understand that. I see that. I understand the math, but what was the reason?
Oh, the reason was to include in the ECA factor all the net power supply costs. Because right now at the 501, not all the power supply costs are in that ECA factor.
Right. So what was added to it?
I couldn't tell you specifically because I don't look back to see how that original 501 and the 99, there's like 99 cents is in the base rate for power supply.
Who did it then? Did you just do the math?
I did the calculation, yes. I did the 669.
Who moved the line item?
Pardon me?
Who moved the line item?
I did. I mean, moved it from 501 to 669. That was based on this calculation.
I understand the calculation, but a follow-up question to Director Hanks was, what's in the power supply, the new ECA rate? What was moved from the base to the ECA?
Everything is in the ECA now. Capacity payments, option payments, our Palo Verde San Juan units, nylon's in there, all our fuel, it's all in the ECA now.
So those are the items that were removed from the base to the ECA.
Well, some of them were in the ECA and some of them weren't. I think probably most of what was moved, I'm guessing, are capacity payments from the base to the ECA.
Yeah, if I might, Mr. President, 501 as the ECA number, from Greg and my point of view, is a plug number, meaning when we walked in the door in 2008, that's what it was. We didn't calculate it. I mean, there have been, Betty's made attempts and other people have made attempts to try and figure out how it settled in. We do know that the board, you as a board, froze it at that level and decided to leave it at that level. Going back and Greg taking a look at all the financials and how we would calculate ECA right now, and taking all the power supply costs, came up with 6.69 cents. So, and then in order to back into a base rate, knowing that all the other costs that aren't in the 669 have to be included in the 1285?
Yeah.
1285, you back into a 6.16 base rate. So that's, I don't think Greg and I are, well, I can tell you, I am not well equipped to tell you what were all the assumptions in the 501 at the time we inherited that number.
It was a guess. It was a calculated guess.
It was for whatever purposes staff and board came up with that.
It wasn't a guess. It was a formula that was based on prior board policy or management.
Perhaps.
But if I could add one thing, when I was doing this work or doing the calculation, the thing not to lose sight on is the 1285 is what the district needs on the forecast going forward. So that is planned on being flat for 3 years, and there's a forecasted increase for 14 and 15. But no matter what we do, we're going to start with 1285 as part of our proposal.
Dr. Broken, on your ECA factor of 6.69 cents, where you have, this is how you calculate that, how many cents of that are not variable components?
Well, in my mind, they're all variable over time because the debt, as an example, the debt service for Scapa or Palo Verde is not level. The O&M changes every year on those projects. The capital changes on those projects depending on what comes up.
But
Obviously,
we have budget adjustments going all the time in the budgets from one reason or another. That doesn't make them variable accounts. There's a planned budget that's passed. That's a fix. To me, it's a constant. Things change, but that doesn't qualify to go, in my mind, in the ECA because they were fixed. There was a known cost. Now, budget adjustments go all the time. Because that happened, it doesn't qualify it as a variable.
I don't know if that's a decision the board has to make, is a capacity charge, 5 years. Should that be in the base rate fixed, or should it be in the ECA rate because in 5 years it'll fluctuate, I guess, so to speak, or a new contract will be made with TransCanada or whoever, Centro Gas and Electric, whoever supplies our pipelines that we're using. I don't know, what does the board think of, for example, the capacity charge on that? Should that be in the base because it is fixed for 5 years? Then you have to raise, or should it be in the ECA where, go ahead.
Along the same line, I'm going to go make a circle. I'll come back to it. I researched this ECA clear back to years 2000. And it's similar in figuring out interest on what is due to certain accounts or programs where it follows the principle. Likewise, on the ECA, the same formula that generated an over or under use should be utilized until you clear the books. Okay? Now, having said that, I hear you loud and clear that you say we've got to maintain a 12.85. I think if I'm hearing you right, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but you got to have that. That's your target. So what I'm saying here is what makes a difference in calculating out over a period of time, whether we're over, under, or what charges were in there. The capacity, well, let me just give a little history. The base rate hasn't been changed in about 20 years, huh? 20 plus years.
Is it 90?
It was 83.
94, I think.
94.
94, okay.
16.
So it's 16 years. During that time, if the ECA started ratcheting up, and there was resistance from the public because the rates were going up, some of those charges would be moved over to base rate, and the base rate would take a hit as far as your M&O and so forth. So, in fairness to planning, maintenance operation, debt service, and so forth, that made a helter-skelter situation.
Oh, yeah.
Likewise, if where there was a, and by the way, the capacity was never moved back. Okay, the capacity, if you go back and you check the records, currently by policy, capacity is still in the base rate. Okay. In calculating out whether we're over or under, if the capacity was in the calculated in that audit in the ECA, as far as calculate what the actual cost. We probably have a problem with that audit. We need to go back and take a look at it. The only difference that it will make will be into the amount of money that's in the rate stabilization fund. Okay? And if you have a target on that, whatever. But the bottom line is, and I think this board have known for some time, I have since I've been on here, that the amount of money funding the base rate is underfunded. The 5.01, I think it was a little higher than that, and we were trying to adjust it because there was an outcry from the public, and we're trying to figure out where we were at with the gas hedge, and we settled at 5.01. And one time I think we moved it down to 4.01, and then when we closed the books out at the end of the year, we had a big red figure. So we had to ratchet back to 5. I think moving forward, if you have a target of 12.85, I think it's only fair to use the same formula that you used to pay whenever we were under collecting the components. Use that same methodology for the over collection and put it wherever it's got to go, whether it goes in a rate stabilization fund or wherever. Once we have that established, then we need to come back. If we want to keep the ECA floating where it's at, or float it and keep the same components, we can do that. But we have to take a look at the base rate, and there has to be some adjustments there. And if I was in your shoes, I would prefer that the adjustment be made in the base rate for 2 reasons. One, it gives you more flexibility, your debt service, your M&O, wherever you want to go with it. And 2, the ECA, if you do have those spikes, it will correct itself. If you make those adjustments, you're not going to have to worry about coming back and covering those costs with a rate increase, because the ECA is going to adjust and take care of it itself. So from that standpoint, for stability of your budgeting, I would prefer that. But I would also, if I was in your shoe, have to know that this board is willing to take a look at the base rate and make the adjustments there. And I know where you're at with the 12.85. We've met in your office and we've had conversations, and I think you know where I'm at on this. But I think, for cleanliness of getting this all cleaned up, squared up where we need to go, that's where I will be. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Greg, were you going to have, this is just an informational item, were you planning to bring this back in 2 weeks for a vote?
I was going to just ask Dave to get some direction from the board, to give you an opportunity to review it and think about it some more, and then if you want me to bring it back.
To be honest, I'm kind of disappointed in the fact that you did not break down the base rate and the ECA factor in your presentation today. So I think I'd like to see another informational item with you breaking down the past and the future of what's involved in the base rate and the ECA factor for me. I'm not sure if it's the will of the board or they want to give other direction.
Well, I like the idea of what you're saying about the present and the future breakdown. I'd also like to see a comparative on the past, the way it was in 2004. With all the components the way they're being, because the one is the present, the next one's the future. I like to see those same components, how they were divided up in the past, on how they affect each of the. And yeah, another information.
I agree. I concur with you. I think we need to know exactly what goes into the base rate and what goes into the ECA, and we do have those listed.
I have a question. Greg, on this chart on page 9 on the current forecast,
yes,
and the floating ECA, how does that thing figure where you get to 2014 and you got 14.83 cents and 15.69 cents?
On the first, the current forecast column, that's based on not having a floating ECA and projecting 5% and a 6% rate increase in 2013 and 2014. And that increase in revenue based on our forecast will allow us to maintain getting back to our 2 times debt service coverage and our $100 million. So that's what that first column gives us. The second column will actually give us a little more money and a little higher coverage because, you know, this is our current forecast and it can change. But if you have a floating ECA and your base is 213, then as those costs go up, then your ECA is going to float up too. So that's the difference between the two. The one on the right is the floating ECA, and the other one is a fixed structure, what we currently have.
If you have to increase your base rate, you have to have public hearings to increase the base rate and everything, right?
That's correct.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like more information.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, on Greg, on the on page 9 with the projected costs that you're going to need to cover debt service and so
Right.
forth. I think what'd be helpful when you bring us that information, how much of that would be that is budgeted in the supply and trading that would be covered by the ECA floating ECA, and how much of it would be in a base rate, what we would need to do there to,
Okay.
you know, and I'd be happy to sit down with you again, but I'm gonna make you buy me lunch next time.
Greg, are you saying that if we float the ECA, we're looking at higher costs in the future? Is that what this?
Well, compared to the current forecast, yes.
Yeah.
Compared to but if prices are going to be prices in the future, I don't understand how the current formula is well, basically what you're saying, the current formula won't recoup costs.
No, it will. It maintains your targeted your 2 targets. It's just that if you float your ECA, it's going to provide more coverage and provide more working capital for you.
Same thing, we just got to cover our costs.
Yeah.
That's all. So,
Provide more coverage and working capital.
Mr. President, I'm trying to bring it all together here. You're looking for us to go back, reconnoiter, and bring back more detail. I think we heard a number of things that we'll bring back more detail as information. We'll bring it back as soon as we can. And hopefully, and I understand you want these 2 components broken out, more detail on it. We can do that.
I think that excuse me.
Past, present, future.
Past, present, future.
I think
Okay,
the
got
more, Dr. Brady, I think the more transparent, because, you know, even when we had, when Beck was here and we had audience, it's very confusing.
Understand.
And I think the more you lay this stuff out, sometimes it's even confusing to the board that's here. So you can imagine what it does to the public. So the more we can lay this thing out and explain what the costs are, the more we can justify what we're doing here. That way, at least we can point to the numbers and give a reason why we're doing what we have to do. They can't come over here and beat us up and tell us that we're hiding things.
No, and our job is to support that effort.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Director Sanchez, we have a public hearing stated
Yeah,
at 5
at
o'clock,
5.
so we better hurry it up.
What are we on? Oscar,
Just
well, we're going to bring it back again.
Yeah.
We're going to bring it back. We're going to bring it back again. But we have 10 minutes for the
4 minutes.
we're going to bring it back again, Oscar. Yeah.
He's been waiting.
Regular clock.
Go ahead and make a statement.
The EPA essentially was to recapture shortfalls of variable energy caused due to IID. In the spirit of fairness to us, the taxpayers, whether we are unemployed, low income, and or unemployed, residential, small businesses, fee bonds, and casinos, farmers, and other collections is basically considered restricted. Money belonging to the ratepayers and rates must be adjusted. Assuredly, the gas hedge fiasco, the ratepayer will be paid enormously inflated ECA charges to rescue IID. These people are known, in my opinion, as salt of the earth. IID belongs to you and me. You are the IID Board of Directors representing us. Taxpayers were supported by the rate increase ostensibly because the administration and others can afford the rate increase. In conclusion, in an Imperial Valley Press article a few weeks ago, Dr. Brian Brady stated supply and trading created a tremendous surplus of $87 million for the coffers of IID. However, in the July 13, 2010 meeting, said person announced a rate increase of $50 million surplus as opposed to $87 million. Where are the people's money? What happened? Why the disparity? Thank you.
Thank you for your handwritten statement. And we'll soon know whether what you're saying has any merit.
I know it has merit.
We'll move on to action agenda. Oh,
It's internal auditing section. There, it's acknowledge and receipt.
we're not doing number 19?
Did I skip one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Status of implementation of recommendations from internal auditing 2009.
Yes,
Oh.
Mr. President,
Oh, he's talking about
1
financial
minute.
report.
We have 34 recommendations, and at this point in time, we have 16 recommendations have been implemented, 18 are reported as in progress. Out of those 18, though, 5 going to be taken care of with the one policy that will be brought to the board by the end of in fourth quarter of this year, and 6 of them are inventory related, and they will be brought to the board also. They reported to be implemented by the fourth quarter of this year. So, other than that, everything looks pretty
Director
good.
Sanchez, could I ask to bring this back at our next meeting so we can have more time? Because I have questions and
Okay.
we don't have enough time today. So
Okay.
bring it back at our next
Bring-
business meeting.
We'll bring it back.
You want to do the same?
Number 20? Same
And-
thing with 20?
And the same with the finances. Bring it back at our next
Okay.
meeting.
All right. Do I conclude meeting? Or-
We have
Consent items.
two consent items
Consent
we'd
items,
like
yeah.
you to address. Number 7 and 3A. Let me get to.
I can take care of number 3.
Number 3A.
I'll take care of
Page
Okay, you got that
33.
one?
I can take care of
Yeah, 3A, it was pretty much explained by Mr. Garber that there was a typo on that 1 cent.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Yeah.
So will that be corrected? Or
It's
how-
already been corrected today.
Okay.
There was a vicious correction that went on.
All right. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Second.
So motion is second. Please vote. Next is from the consent agenda is item number 7.
And that's the lease purchase agreement between IID and PNC Equipment Finance. Mr. Broking is available for questions.
Yeah, I asked this to be brought back again because, as this all, remember we looked at the list, I believe it was last week. We've already paid cash, we're this late in the year, and some of the stuff you're adding to this financing of the 2010 budget was actually purchased in 2009. And all this, I think, reduces our non-operating revenue, right? Other non-operating revenue. So, that's why I think the budget and your financials are out of whack, because we're leasing too much. And being this late in the year is why I just assumed we pay cash for it.
Well, historically, I believe that's the way we have been doing this. We pay cash and then lease it back.
It generates some cash on hand going toward the end of the year.
Yeah, it basically saves your cash and lets you build that up as opposed to paying cash for your vehicles.
Why are you adding the 2009 stuff on? Seems to me that shouldn't even be included. It seems like you're really digging to generate some cash here.
Well, a lot of it depends, I think, on when we send out RFPs or requests for interest, interest quotes as to when we end up actually doing the leasing. So to be honest with you, I don't know the details of when all these were purchased, whether they're in 2009 or 2010, but I'm pretty sure that we did forecast that we would lease those units whenever they were purchased.
We've been working for efficiencies and savings and stuff, and better planning, figuring that would bring things in line. This gives me a false sense of security if all of a sudden I see that we have this much cash on hand, or we saved this much. It really wasn't. A leasing deal is just a deferment. It's going to be there until it's paid out. This one's going to charge us, I believe, 1.6, 1.7 more interest than what we're earning on the cash.
It's really part of our overall debt service plan is to get the interest rate is 2.35%. So we like to have some short-term debt that has lower rates than opposed to a long-term issue with the same amount of debt. We just pay a higher rate. So it's I understand what you're saying. It's just probably a little difference of philosophy on how to approach the problem.
Okay. Any more questions? I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. All right. Do I conclude?
You conclude, and then we'll open up the workshop. You want to take a 10 minutes?